Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. And, I want to acknowledge the song at the beginning, which struggling to find all my data here, is Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl at White Bat Audio. And today I have an amazing guest who has only kind of talked about this stuff very publicly at two recent events. One was on an Extreme and the other was at Contact in the Desert. But he's made some significant additions to it as he parses through the data. But I want to welcome Richard Geldreich Jr., who is a software engineer and researcher who has made notable contributions to both the technology and UFO research communities. While he is recognized for his technical expertise in areas such as compression algorithms and GPU programming, Geldreich has increasingly focused on the study of UFO phenomena and government cover-ups. His presentations and writings delve into historical investigations, including the role of radar in early military projects in UFO detection. Geldreich's work in this field has highlighted significant gaps in publicly available data, suggesting deliberate suppression or loss of crucial information related to UFO sightings and encounters. I want to welcome Richard Geldreich. Richard, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. How you doing? This is the first podcast I've ever done, about this topic. Anyway.
All right. Well, you'll be fine. You've done kind of this before. You'll be fine.
I've actually been talking to Sean behind the scenes for I guess a year now. We met at the Soul Conference,
and he's already making me money. Christian Morales is so excited that he's looking very forward to this. So thank you, Christian. I appreciate you. How you doing? I'm Cold. Good to see you again. Yes, Terrence, you made a live one. You made a good live one. Okay, so without further ado, Richard, as always, comes prepared. So he's going to share his presentation. For those listening on the radio, he's also going to do a little bit of explaining. So I ask people who have visual of it to be patient, as well as people on the radio who can't see it. He's going to do his best. So without further ado, take it away, Richard, and I will clean it up for you so that you can.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate it. I just want to throw this out there. Sean asked me to come on his show months ago, and I had 3 days of nightmares. And so I'm like, Sean, I can't do it. But here I am. So, so I first gave this presentation at the Contact in the Desert conference a few months ago near Palm Springs. But I've added a bunch to it, and I'll do my best to describe the slides for people who can't see it. And so the presentation's called Using Archives to Explore the Early Years of the UFO Cover-Up. And real fast, the reason why I started to investigate this is because Lou Elizondo, Colonel Nell, Chris Mellon came out, and Dr. Eric Davis said, oh, by the way, UFOs are real. And I'm like, what? I thought that I didn't I studied them a little bit in the 90s for fun, read some books or whatever, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then when they all came out and said, oh, yeah, by the way, they're real, I'm like, wait a second. If they're real, that means history is not what we think it is. And so that's why I've been researching this. And so anyway, I just want to mention for anybody who can see this, these slides are available in PDF form here. I've already uploaded them to archive.org, and I have some tiny URL and short URLs up here. They're easily found on archive.org if you just type my name in and look for Contact in the Desert. Okay, so who am I? I work on open source software for a living these days. Before that, I did a lot of video game work. I spent many years in the trenches crunching on all sorts of video games. After doing that, for a long time, I started to study video games a lot and realized, wait a second, there is a need for data compression here. And I identified the types of content that would benefit from compression. And I started working on that on the side. And then eventually I started just releasing libraries for free. And that led to opening doors at various corporations. So I've worked at companies that have been acquired. I've worked on 3D video games, 2D video games, mobile games, all kinds of stuff. I have some data compression software in some really famous games like Age of Empires and stuff like that. These days, I've also worked on some open source UAP related efforts, which are on GitHub. And I was invited to the Seoul conference, and I attended that last year. And so I've been coding since late 1985. And so one of the things I've done, it was release a UFO_data repo it's an open source repo on GitHub. And what I did is I started, like, once I heard that UFOs were actually real, I'm like, okay, where's the data? Like, it's cool that all these government figures are saying, okay, this is real, but I want to see some evidence. And they're obviously not going to show us a grail on a gurney to make a joke, but there must be evidence somewhere that this is real. Like, where's it at? And so it turns out many other scientists, engineers, researchers have been researching this problem for many, many decades, long before I was born. And so what I did is I found as much of this data as possible, and a lot of it was lost on the modern internet. So I had to go to archive.org and find it and resurrect it, bring it back. And so what I've done is find all this data and normalize it so it all follows a simple standard JSON or JSON format. And JSON data is readable by many different programming languages. Anybody who programs is probably familiar with it. So I've basically taken all this data and I've normalized it so that others can use it. And what I've also done is track down who owns what data. And I've made sure that everybody's intellectual property and copyrights are preserved. And so a lot of this data comes from the United States Air Force. I focused on the Blue Book unknowns, which are like the cases that even Blue Book couldn't debunk. I've also found collections from authors in the past, like Frank Scully, a librarian named George M. Eberhard, who's done an amazing job compiling thousands and thousands of reports. Jacques Vallée, NICAP, was a UFO sighting organization back in the 60s, primarily. And Larry Hatch, who's a programmer, and I say about half of my database, 55,000 records, is from Larry Hatch, approximately. I've also translated some French chronologies, which were super valuable. And so I just want to put this up real fast. So there's many different types of evidence, and obviously the best type of evidence would be real physical evidence. Like, show me a craft, show me the objects, show me a grail on a slab. You know what I mean? We don't have that. So unfortunately, we have to look at other types of evidence. And so there's actually many, many different types of evidence. There's not just physical evidence, obviously. There's documentary evidence, scientific evidence, circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, but there's a problem we have here. And the problem is security classifications can impact all of this type of evidence. So what I did in this slide here is I asked ChatGPT 4o, I'm like, list me every single type of evidence. And then for each type, how would security classifications impact that type of evidence? And so, for example, direct evidence, it said restricted if involving classified info, access limited to cleared individuals. Okay, that makes perfect sense, right? We don't want, just anybody having direct evidence of UAPs, right? We don't want Russian agents or Chinese agents, whatever, having any access to this stuff whatsoever. Well, unfortunately, all these security classifications impact pretty much every different type of evidence that we have. And so as researchers, what we're trying to do is explore the surface area of the national security state and try to figure out, all right, what leaked? Because pretty much everybody blabs, even people with clearances. Sooner or later, they're going to blab. They're going to say something, maybe on a deathbed confession or whatever. And so with modern information technology, now we can go to archive.org, Google Books, Google Search, DuckDuckGo, etc. It could go on and on. We can go to private archives, public archives, books, and we can just search it with modern information tech and find things that we weren't aware of before. And so that's what these slides are about, basically. And so I just want to summarize my overall impression after doing this work for the last about 3 years now. What are my personal impressions? And so the first thing I realize is, putting aside UAPs for a sec, the true history of radar has been suppressed and classified. So everybody thinks we know everything about what happened in World War II. That's not the case. As I research this and poke around in newspaper archives, which are now digitized, many of them are digitized, and we have about 1 billion pages available right now, and that's real. It's about 1 billion and increasing every day. we're finding all sorts of information that nobody's aware of. It's not in any encyclopedia or history book. So the true history of radar has been suppressed and classified. There is a famous ufologist, a nuclear physicist named Stanton Friedman. It turns out, in my opinion, he was right. Friedman would say on video, radar, rockets, nukes were connected to UAPs. You need to look at all those three of those things to understand UAPs. Friedman also wrote a paper in the late 80s and a bunch of research on a debunking figure named Dr. Donald Menzel from Harvard Observatory. And Menzel was a notorious debunker in the 50s and 60s. And he did everything he could to make everybody think, oh, UAPs are not real. Well, it turns out Menzel was absolutely on the NSA's payroll. And so Friedman did a bunch of research on that. And I've been poking around in archives and newspaper articles, and I found rock solid evidence, like right from NSA.gov's website, that he absolutely was on the NSA payroll. He was an NSA specialist. He had a crypto clearance. So Dr. James E. McDonald was a well-known researcher in the 60s and 70s for UAPs. Unfortunately, he committed suicide. In my opinion, they drove him to his death. He was right. So he wrote a paper or a report with another researcher. He called it the 1947 wave. And in there, I'm going to show this. In there, there's a graph showing a histogram or a frequency graph of all the sighting reports for each day between June and July 1947, which is a key time period in U.S. history. And it turns out if you go and look at the modern sighting databases, or you go, interestingly, into newspaper archives, which he did not have access to, it corroborates his report, which I feel is very significant. And so summer 47 to the early 1950s, from what I can determine, looking through these newspaper archives and the sighting report databases and FOIA documents, that all hell broke loose, especially the summer of 47. Summer 47, Farmington Armada, early March 1950, and then 1952, July 1952, the summer Washington, D.C. overflights. We were overflown. Something happened. The newspaper footprint is unmissable. If you look at it like a signal, it's loud and clear. And there was mass hysteria, but the hysteria does make sense because we were overflown, and many people, many high-quality witnesses witnessed these objects or whatever they were. And by the way, this was not just the United States. This was Canada and Mexico as well. I've done a bunch of research on newspaper articles from the era, and it turns out the Vatican was deeply involved, at least in 47, the summer of 47. And one of the words that I keep finding is containment. And so we'll go to the next slide here. Summer 47, local. This is interesting. So I've been going through, I have about 5,000 newspaper clippings so far. And for the summer of 47, I started researching any hit for flying saucer, flying disc, unidentified airplane, just a whole bunch of different phrases. The phrases do change, over the decades, but those are the phrases used back then. Almost all of them are flying saucer or flying disc. There was a lot of very strange activity reported near White Sands, New Mexico. And metals were reported to have fallen only a few miles from White Sands by local witnesses, and this wound up in newspaper archives. And I do have links in my PDFs here to all these newspaper clippings. So if you just go to archive.org and look at my PDF, you can see all these links and go click and look at them all. So it's really interesting. When you look at the mid-late 40s and 50s, what you notice is that everybody thinks in UAPs like, oh, U.S. Air Force covered this all up. Well, it's not true. The U.S. Air Force would go back and forth on it. They would cover it up and tell people, oh, it's just spots in front of your eyes. And then there would be newspaper articles from the United States Air Force saying, oh, well, actually, this is a really big situation. This is a serious matter. And, we can't identify all these objects. So it turns out the United States Air Force themselves would push forward the public's awareness of UAPs repeatedly in the late 40s and early 50s. Okay. So if you look specifically looking at 47, it's extremely confusing picture. And I've had to look at literally thousands of articles to just try to get an idea, a fuzzy picture, an estimate of the situation of what happened. There were many hoaxes. It's hard to parse through what people were actually seeing, what were hoaxes, what were potentially planted articles. But I do believe that the picture is getting less fuzzy as we gather. I have other people help me out on this, mostly on Twitter and X, social media. as we get more articles, the picture is forming that there definitely was a major event over the United States, US, and Mexico. We're talking over 44 states. So in my opinion, UAPs back then were a form of intimidation. And I say that because your buddies don't fly over your most sensitive installations, without permission. Like, clearly these were UAPs, unidentified aircraft or objects. They weren't from Russia. They weren't ours. Whose were they? They didn't have permission to fly over, so they were airspace violations. Dr. Brandenburg, who's been on Sean's show recently, so actually several times, I think he would agree with that it was a form of intimidation. He's talked quite a bit about that. But I would also want to throw out there that I've been through at this time, I've been through every event in my chronology, 55,000 events on GitHub that I've released. It's not just intimidation. Apparently there's many different forces or NHIs or whatever they are involved, and not all of the interactions were negative. There were many warnings given to people across the world, especially in South America, about us abusing nuclear technology and poisoning the planet with H-bomb testing. So as all these UAP events were occurring, what most probably modern people don't realize is there was a lot of A-bomb and H-bomb testing going on. There was like approximately 2,000 tests. Many were underground in the later days, but many were open air. And you can find throughout all newspaper articles and archives, you can find many reports of radioactive contamination in milk, in animals, in soil. So it was a big deal. Like, I don't think like the nuclear testing and the UAP situation were completely unrelated. Okay, and another little thing here on the slide is I've been through, and anybody can do this. They're at archive.org now. Project Sign, Grudge, and Blue Books Records, the microfilm. It's been digitized. It's all available. They're nonsensical. Like, I put one up on Twitter a few days ago. There's a remote witness report of a 20-foot diameter shiny metal objects. They flew over a lake. They were witnessed at close range. They reported it to Project Grudge, Blue Book, and Blue Book said, "Oh, they were just birds." And it's completely ridiculous. There's no way, if you read the witness reports, which are in these official U.S. government files, there's no way that what they reported were birds. Okay, so I'm going to go to I have a timeline slide here. And so going back, this is kind of a summary, like a picture of what I'm going to present here. Going back in time to World War II all the way up to now. So in World War II, a whole bunch of extremely significant events occurred. There was a secret radar moon bounce. And as far as I can determine, this moon bounce is still secret. However, news leaked. So if you go to wikipedia.com and you look up Project Diana, it'll say, the moon bounce occurred in January 1946. That's not true. There are now we found multiple articles with multiple people. Some of them were quite significant people, scientists and stuff like that, who said, no, that's not true. The actual moon bounce occurred early. Why is this important? Well, this would be the first time we sent extremely powerful radar signals out into space explicitly to the moon, and they bounced to another body and they bounced back. So, of course, during World War II, there were A-bombs first set off. There's Trinity. There was that Nagasaki, Hiroshima explosions. Those are very significant events. They might have been witnessed from space as well. Who knows? But there's also an organization I'm going to cover in these slides called the Borderland Sciences Research Association, which was later turned into a foundation in the 50s. And this was founded by a man named Maid Lane. I'll cover that in a bit in the slides. Okay, going to 46. 46 is a huge year. So first, it's a year after war. It's like an intermediary year. It's after World War II, after all the surrenders, but before summer of 47 overflights. 46 was also the year of the ghost rocket sightings over in Sweden, France, parts of Europe, Greece. So in 46, the first photo from space took place on a V-2 rocket. In October 46, the radar detects meteors for the first time. So we were sending powerful radar waves up, would hit orbit, and we got them bouncing off meteors, and we detected the signals. In 46, October 46 specifically, the BSRA organization, they gave a warning that, hey, a bunch of people on the West Coast have witnessed UAPs and that they're coming back in approximately 1 year. And this warning is all throughout newspaper archives, so we have a firm date on it, and it can't be argued. There was definitely they issued a firm warning. There's an author named Richard Shaver, who was a science fiction author back then, and he wrote an amazing story in 46. I'm going to cover in a bit, and it was all about NHI crash retrievals, which in 46 would be like completely totally science fiction. As far as I can determine, he's one of the first authors to write about that idea, which is really interesting. He also wrote that radar, and this is hard to believe, but radar actually, some of that technology came or was inspired by tech from crash retrievals, which is pretty cool. So anyway, move to summer 47. All hell breaks loose. There was a large UAP wave, June and July 47 over the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The SRA issued more warnings. These warnings are in official FBI archives. On July 8th, 1947, the SRA said, hey, do not shoot at these things. I'll show that in a bit. Roswell, everybody knows about Roswell. The newspaper archives came out, newspaper releases came out in July 8th, 1947. There were censored photos. I'm going to cover that next. And the Maury Island incident, which was a bunch of craft that were spotted that apparently dropped some metals over Maury Island in Washington. That occurred in summer of 47. All hell broke loose. This is really what happened, as far as I can determine. So moving forward to 1950, just 6 months later, Captain Mantell dies chasing a saucer. So the official story is that he got too high up chasing whatever he was chasing, and he ran out. He didn't have oxygen, and he died. He passed out in the crash. But it's well known in the late 40s and 50s anyway, and even the United States Air Force themselves associated that with him chasing a saucer. So there were actually, at least by the early 50s, there were at least 3 personnel that we know died related to saucers. That was the Maury Island incident and Captain Mantell. So anyway, in 1950, there was what they call the Farmington Armada. There was the first crash retrieval lecture, March 1950 as well. We actually have that lecture on audio tape. Now it's on YouTube. The Air Force Office of Special Investigation interrogated a man named George Kohler. Kohler claimed that he had some crash retrieval debris, and a FOCI, U.S. Army, CIC counterintelligence, all those guys came and basically like, okay, where's the materials? Well, we have that on tape too. Turns out we found it in archives out in the University of Wyoming. Frank Scully, famous author back in this day, famous journalist. He wrote a book, the first book on crash retrievals, which is not about one retrieval, but about 3 crash retrievals with bodies. Now, he didn't use the word Roswell. However, one of these crash retrievals, at least one of them occurred in New Mexico. So he actually describes the Roswell crash, as far as I can determine. A crash very similar to Roswell. And this is, by the way, in late 1950. So moving forward a bit, Washington, D.C. is overflown. That's actually July and August 1952. It's not well known that the UAPs reappeared over D.C., but by that time, the radar operators, I think, were basically told to keep their mouths shut. UAPs were shot at 52, and there were fragments. It also turns out that, and I won't cover this mostly in the slides, I'm just going to mention that there's been some recent developments. There have been astronomical transients, or basically disappearing lights on photographic slides that were spotted around the same time Washington, D.C. is being overflown, and these lights disappeared. They appeared for an hour and it disappeared, and they have the plate evidence now. I'm going to cover some of this a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into archives. So what I've done is I looked at Frank Scully's public archive at the University of Wyoming. It's called the American Heritage Center down at Laramie. And Frank Scully has literally thousands of typewritten pages down there that basically nobody's looked at. And so I paid one of the people that works there, and I've also paid an independent proxy researcher to go scan them carefully. And we've released all of this publicly. I have a Google Drive up. You can find it on my Medium. And what I found was that Frank Scully wrote this book that was famous back then on crash retrievals, which came out in around October from memory, like late 1950. Well, Frank actually had years of notes, typewritten notes, in his archive that he never published, never talked about in newspapers. And now, if you go through these notes, you'll learn that, wait a second, Scully knew all kinds of stuff that was going on back then about UAPs that nobody knows about, and it was all just in his archive, and it's all been forgotten. So I've been going through those notes. I'm going to have them in this presentation right here, and you can see them yourself. So what he found is at late 53, there was all kinds of shit going on with rumors of a flying saucer was captured. There was an NHI or something, whatever, an occupant in custody. They called him a man in custody back then. It all related to Edwards Air Force Base. This is in late 53. There were secret meetings involving major industrial figures in late 53. Scully got all these rumors. He was an old-fashioned journalist. He had a network of other journalist friends and their families and their friends, and they cast a wide net. They knew the Air Force was lying about UAPs, and so they just kept digging and digging and digging. Moving to early 54, there's a famous broadcaster named Frank Edwards. He was like the Art Bell of his era. He had millions of listeners. He received tons and tons of letters. He announced in early 54, I think around January, that we had captured a saucer. And this was heard by millions of people in the United States on the radio. There were many Edwards Air Force Base saucer occupant rumors in several archives, not just Scully's, not just from Frank Edwards. In the UFO literature, you'll find this mysterious guy from the Borderlands people I mentioned earlier, called a guy named Gerald Light, which is a pseudonym. He visits Edwards Air Force Base, and he claims there's saucers there, and all kinds of shit went down. Naval intelligence was fishing around, and a lot of those notes, informant notes, wound up in Frank Scully's archives. And Edwards Air Force Base was locked down in early 1954. It was actually locked down for quite a period of time, and apparently naval intelligence was locked out, and so they started fishing. Okay, now let's fast forward all the way to 2010. I'm going to cover this near the end of my presentation. A guy comes out. He's a state rep from New Hampshire. Comes out of the blue. His name's Henry W. McElroy, I think, Jr. Eisenhower, he claimed Eisenhower was briefed and met with NHI. As far as I can determine, and I have some research I've been working with behind the scenes, the information he had likely came from an ex-intel officer with an expired NDA. He's known as Agent Cooper. Linda Milton Howe and Richard Dolan interviewed him a few years ago. We've anonymized this guy, and his name was Oscar Wayne Wolf. I think the information that the state rep had came from McElroy. I think came from a family member that was in common with both, like an extended family connection. So anyway, that's interesting. And now here we are, 2024. We have controlled disclosure, UAPDA, David Grush, etc. So, Sean, can you hear me, by the way?
Loud and clear, brother. Keep going.
Just checking. Okay. All right. So, first thing I want to put out here is, even if you don't believe in UAPs or UFOs, you think it's all bunk, well, we still have a very large unexplained database signal, and it's getting bigger and louder every day. So if you go to newspapers.com, you get a subscription. It's like $10-15 a month. You start searching. You can search for, quote, flying saucer, flying disc. If you search for just flying saucer, you'll get, as of a month ago, 741,842 hits. That's quite a signal, and it's growing. You search for unidentified flying object, 147,000 hits. Flying disc, 84,000 hits. Flying disc with a K instead of a C, 16,000 hits. UFO sighting, 113,000 hits. UFO report, 27,000 hits. You add all that together, you get 1.1 million hits. So whatever this phenomena is, it's big, and it keeps reoccurring and has not gone away. By the way, this does not include the UFO acronym, the letters UFO. I can't search for that reliably. I suspect if we could search for that reliably, because it's quite small on newspapers.com, its engine doesn't like little acronyms. I suspect if we could search for that reliably, we would probably get 2 to 3 million hits. So the deal is, like, if depending on how you look at UAPs, if you believe that there was censorship, I personally believe that there was, at least at some level, at a national level, after the 1953 Robertson panel, which was CIA. They couldn't censor the local reports reliably. Back in the old days, before the internet, local newspapers were still a central place where information would be distributed locally. And so we have many of these newspapers scanned now. Newspapers.com has over 1 billion. And there's other newspaper archives, by the way. Some of them, like in Australia, are ran by the government down there. Okay, so
it's also much more difficult to suppress, because there's just
exactly.
Especially back in the day when they didn't have the resources, they could only really influence the major media outlets, which they did.
The news wires, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, just to give you an idea of the power of newspaper archives, so there's these documents we've known about in the UAP world for several decades now. They're called the Majestic documents, and some say they're all bogus, they're all bunk. Some say they're a mixture of real documents and fake ones and whatever. I don't really care personally. I just look at the information in these leaked documents and see if I can find corroboration or not. And it turns out, for some of these documents, you can find incredible amounts of corroboration. And so, in one of them is the MJ12 fifth annual report, which is early 50, I think like 52. There's a chronology in here, and what I've been working on for years is a chronology. So as a chronologer, I'm like, whoa, there's a chronology in here. I love this. This is great. Let's see if it's real or not. Let's see if I can fit it into my chronology, which is a bunch of other people's chronologies that are all merged together. Well, it turns out, yes, you can. You can merge it extremely well. And so this is one of my favorite little hits here. and entry 15 at the request. Here I'll quote. I'm reading now from the Majestic document. At the request of panel member Cardinal Francis Spellman, met with the president to discuss the containment within the Catholic Church and its hierarchy of religious speculation as mass sightings occur. Such containment was successful during the 1947 sightings when Cardinal Spellman met with Secretary of War on 29th of June. The president has been briefed on Defense Plan 4P, which was written in part by the panel member. Okay, unquote. And so the panel is the MJ12 or the UAP Working Group panel. I mean, this may not be real. This might be real. I mean, we're not sure. It's fuzzy. It's a Fortean or a very analog document. Okay, well, okay, go to the next slide here. It turns out if you research where was President Truman at on June 29th, 1947, oh, he was meeting with Spellman in I think it was New York, from memory. Yeah, New York. In person, he accepted an honorary diploma with Spellman. So President Truman was with Spellman, and Spellman was a very major figure throughout the Catholic hierarchy in 20th century history. His FBI file, by the way, is public now. It's fascinating. And
at one point, I think he was almost up potentially like a candidate to be Pope as well.
Like he was a big figure.
Yeah, extremely significant.
Yeah, and so if you go through the 1947 and 48 and 46 newspaper archives, what you'll notice is that the Catholic hierarchy and the U.S. military people, high up, officials and personnel officers, they were super tight back then. So I don't think it's as tight now as it was back then, but there are many newspaper articles I've saved in the 5,000 I've gotten showing that. And so this is interesting because David Grush, he testified in Congress under oath about UAPs and crash retrievals relatively recently. He said the Catholic hierarchy was involved, and he said they date back to World War II. And so I'm like, wait a second, that's the Majestic documents. Let's go poke around a little bit. And so it turns out whoever wrote this Majestic document, they knew that Truman and Spellman met, which is pretty obscure information. Like now it's easy to find, just go to newspapers.com, but these Majestic documents came out in the 80s and early mid 90s. It would have been a lot harder back then. But even if they are not real, they're a really useful research age because I know that during, by the way, June 29th, the entire country was being overflown by UAPs. That's only 5 days after Kenneth Arnold's sighting. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next section of my slides now. Let's dig in. There's something in here which I find absolutely fascinating. So Project Sign, Grudge, Blue Book records. Very serious project back then. We have many of their documents are now on archive.org. And so I read in Frank Scully, that author, the first crash retrieval author's archives. I was going through the thousands of documents in there. And in there was an advertisement for a book written by Kenneth Arnold. And he was the guy the aviator who saw the saucers on June 24th, 1947. And Ray Palmer, who was a sci-fi author and an editor. Well, okay, I found an advertisement from these guys. And the advertiser said, hey, we got a book coming out. I think the book was like 1952, something like that. And in the book, they're like, hey, we have some censored photos. And I'm like, wait a second. What do you mean there's censored photos? Is there any proof that in 1947, any photos were censored? Is there proof of this? Because normally I think all photos are questionable, probably bullshit. I'm very skeptical of photos and videos. But however, I'm less skeptical if you can prove that it was censored. Now I'm super interested. Well, it turns out, yes, there's one set of censored photos. It's from an individual named William A. Rhodes. There's actually a Wikipedia article on this guy. And he was an astronomer, inventor, Project Sign guys, U.S. government officials investigated William A. Rhodes intensely. You can find all the documents in the Project Blue Book records. They could not debunk this guy. He was legit. They even pulled they went to the neighbors of this guy. They pulled his credit report. There weren't credit reports back then, but they did I think there were actually. They pulled his credit information, all this stuff, right? Anyway, turns out, yeah, they did censor some photos. We have a document. I have it right here. I'll zoom in on it. On July 8th, 1947, by the way, which is Roswell Day. That's when Roswell was announced to the country to crash, or crashes, the retrieval. It turns out in 1947, on July 8th, I'm quoting now, memorandum for the officer in charge is an official U.S. government document. Unidentifiable objects, Williams Field, Chandler, Arizona, 14th July 47. On July 8th, 1947, this agent obtained pictures of unidentifiable objects, Exhibit 1 and 2, from the managing editor of the Arizona Republic newspaper. And it says these pictures were taken by Mr. and we know it's Rhodes. This is a well-known document. It's in Phoenix, Arizona, at sunset on 7th of July 47. Now, remember these dates, 7th of July and 8th of July. These are key dates in U.S. history. The objects flew at inconceivable speeds, making 3 circles in the vicinity of Mr. Rhodes' home. Okay, and this basically, it has agents' notes in there and whatnot. Okay, and so this was declassified by the DoD. It's unclassified information. Now, this is an official document. It says FTTRC at the bottom. So this is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Foreign Technology Division. Okay, so here, now I go to the next slide. I have these pictures of the suppressed photos. This is what they didn't want us to see, the U.S. public, in July 1947. It was only printed in one paper. It did not go national because they basically yanked it, and they said, nope, World War II style censorship kicked in. This is the only photos personally that I know that have really for sure been censored, and they're fascinating. The one on the left shows motion blur. The one on the right, that's not a disc. This is not a flying disc, by the way, which I find interesting. This is not a flying saucer. This is something else. This is a crescent-shaped vehicle. They have, as I said earlier, they heavily investigated William Rhodes, the guy who took these pictures. Now, here's the deal. I have a 55,000 event, UAP event chronology. In the chronology, we can go, we have it sorted by date. We can look what sightings were happening in Phoenix around this time. Well, it turns out there was a mass sighting, 80 people in Phoenix, about a few minutes before, of 2 large silver orbs. Now, it's well known on, if you follow social media and UFO Twitter, that these little orb things, they seem to follow these UAPs. They seem to appear next to them a lot. So I find that really interesting. So there was a lot of shit going on around Phoenix when this photo was apparently taken. Okay, I have another picture of from another source, the same photo. That's a suppressed photo. It's a crescent-shaped object. It's interesting because in the middle, it looks like there's some kind of a light being emitted. And by the way, this photo has been analyzed endlessly over the decades by many researchers. And it was also analyzed very closely by Project Sign personnel in the late 40s, and they thought it was extremely interesting. So what's interesting about this, too, is Kenneth Arnold gave a report to the U.S. government about what he saw on June 24th, 1947. And what Kenneth Arnold drew sort of resembles the shape, kind of what Rhodes spotted. It wasn't actually a flying saucer. It was more of a crescent-shaped vehicle that flew in a certain direction. Okay, so that's the only photos I'm interested in because they've been censored. So I'm going to go to the next part of my presentation. Frank Scully's archive. So in the late 40s, in 1949, you can see in the newspaper archives that there was claims that UFOs, that UAPs had crashed. There's many leaks that started flooding out. One of them was from Alvarez, who I think either won the Nobel Prize or was a Nobel laureate. I think that was one of the first leaks, actually. So late 49, a bunch of information was flooding out. Oh, yeah, these things have crashed. So Frank Scully, in the late 40s, he was a journalist. I'll cover him in a second here. He catches wind of the situation. He's Catholic. He's tied in with the Catholic hierarchy, by the way, in the LA area. And he starts talking about it in one of his publications. And at first, they're just rumors. And he starts apparently talking to people who were involved in the program at the time. And he starts gathering all these rumors and leaks and stuff, and he puts them in his notes. And so Frank Scully, all of his notes went to the American Heritage Center in the mid-late 80s by his wife. She put them in there. Apparently, a few of his notes are with the family still. I'm not really sure, but there's thousands of pages of notes and documents in his archive. He authored a book called Behind the Flying Saucers in 1950. It was a blockbuster. It was the first book on crash retrievals. The book supposedly has been debunked. It's forgotten, but I'm definitely taking a second look now because he covered it for anybody else, and I think that's significant. So as I said earlier, I reached AHC researchers to officially digitize his audio tapes, and I've had a proxy researcher they recommended digitize all of his relevant papers. I didn't digitize the entire archive because it's enormous. He had a lot of political activity from the 30s and 40s. He ran, for something and whatever. I didn't digitize anything I didn't think would be related to UAPs, like stuff from the 30s. We found a bunch. He has a bunch of audio tapes. I've digitized most of them, but not all of them. There's wire recordings. That's a late 40s technology. Unfortunately, they don't have a wire playback machine, but they did have reel-to-reel playback capability and digitization capability. I put a bunch of these things on YouTube, and there are URLs in my slides. You can go listen yourself some of these digitized recordings. So, by the way, all the Frank Scully stuff here is completely public. Anybody could go. I have the URL, the Google Drive. You can just go and look at exactly the information that we have, or you can just go to Laramie, Wyoming, and look at it yourself. So, who was this guy, Francis Scully? He lived from 1892 to 1964. He was educated at Columbia. He worked at the New York Sun, Variety, 20th Century Fox. He helped Grand Duke Alexander of Russia write his life story. He was that guy was advisor to Emperor Nicholas II. 57, Pope Pius the Seventh knighted Scully, and that's the 12th. Excuse me, Order of Saint Gregory. Grush said Vatican was involved, so I find that really interesting. Sorry, my Roman numeral. I'm not an expert on Roman numerals. Passed away nearby. I put nearby because I presented this first.
Yeah, Pope Pius the 12th. Pope Pius the 12th.
Okay, 12th. Yeah, it's not VI.
Yeah.
His wife Alice, who's in the photo I have in the slides here, she donated his archive. Much of that is typewritten, thankfully, so we can OCR it with computers. He donated his archive to the American Heritage Center in 1988, and he may have met the Pope in person. There was a plaque. A researcher in the 80s named, I think his name William Moore, visited Alice Scully, and he noticed a plaque that apparently said that he visited the Pope in person. I don't have any evidence of that other than William Moore, an author. He wrote the Roswell Incident book in 1980. I don't have any evidence of that. I know for sure he was knighted. That's all over the newspapers. But if he did visit the Pope in person, I think that would be absolutely fascinating. So I'm still researching that. Okay, so the book, 1950, came out, the first crash retrieval book, blockbuster book. He described 3 crash retrievals, not just Aztec, like debunkers claim. And the Aztec crash was in 1948. And here's the interesting thing. Frank Scully said he was adamant, and he kept to this his entire life. So did his wife, that he had 8 scientist informants. He combined these informants together. He recorded them on audio tapes or wire recordings, I'm not sure. And he combined their testimony together into a man he called Dr. G. He claimed that Dr. G was a composite of 8 different scientists whose stories were tape recorded and then synthesized by me. That's Frank, where they were in substantial agreement. So it's interesting. Frank Scully had the latest recording technology. It's plausible. Maybe he did. Maybe the wire recordings are actually still there. We just need to get them digitized. Maybe we have them on tape. The archive shows, now this is where it gets interesting to me. If you look at his archive, there are informant notes in there. Some of them were at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, working there. Another was at Lockheed. We have their names. We have their addresses. We have their phone numbers at the time. And by the way, Scully never published this information anywhere. He just held on to it. I sort of mentioned the archive contains many hours of wire and tape recordings. So the other interesting thing about his archive is there are legal release forms in this archive for a planned movie for these 8 scientists. And there was also negotiations for how much the scientists would be paid. And I'm like, wait a second. And by the way, he never talked about these release forms, to my knowledge. Why would he have release forms if it was fake? Doesn't make much sense. And he wrote over and over, and by the way, has hours of audio testimony and stuff about saucers may use a form of magnetic propulsion. So in the late 40s and 50s, it came out that saucers had extremely powerful magnetic fields. Witnesses would, this goes back to the early mid-40s, people that would see UAPs, when they have compasses, the compasses would go wild, gyro compasses, the planes would go wild, whatever. And so he wrote this in his book that these things might use form of magnetic propulsion. Okay, so supposedly Scully's book's debunked. If you search for Frank Scully or his book, it's like, that's all bullshit, it's all debunked. Well, it turns out it's not that simple. So the debunkers just limit you, and they say, oh, no, he only covered Aztec, and he only got information from 2 guys, Silas Newton and Leo Jabauer. There was a press hit piece issued in 1952. They tried to buy off Scully. The information's in his archive. They offered him $10,000, which was quite a bit of money back in 51, 52. Scully absolutely refused. He said, no, I was talking to these informants, these scientists. Newton and Jabauer were lawfared in 53. We all know what lawfare is today. Back in the old days, people weren't as familiar, maybe at all, with lawfaring. So they attacked these guys. Now, in my personal opinion, I think these guys were used by the program to get the information out there. And the reason I think that is because I think the scientists were against the UAP cover-up. They were against holding this information back from the U.S. public. But the intelligence people were like, nope, this is all secret. We can't have the Russians know about this. Cold War. It would cause panic. And so there was this constant battle back and forth, many leaks from scientists. I think this was kind of like basically an effort at acclimation. And that rumors that they were going to acclimate the public came out starting in the late 40s in newspaper archives and later on in books. Okay, so now we're going to get into who backed Scully's book. Dr. Robert Sarbacher, an Einstein student who was also part of the U.S. R&D board, for sure backed this book. and he backed in the early 80s, and he also backed it a few decades before that. Leonard Stringfield, a well-known ufologist, author, World War II Air Force intelligence, he supported this book too. And so let's get into some of the notes that Scully has in his archives, and anybody can go look at right now and see. And I've put on my Twitter and my Medium the exact file folder in the archive you can go to and find this stuff. So Scully's unpublished notes, quote, one of Dr. G's men assigned to Wright Field, he didn't spell that right, by the way, we'll talk, and quote, we'll talk privately with what's going on saucer wise at Lockheed. Wait a second, this is February 10th, 1950. There's no saucers at Lockheed. Nobody knows about that. How did Scully know that Lockheed had any connection to saucers? So there's actually, by the way, there's names in here and there's dates, addresses, phone numbers. As researchers, we can, one in the guy who's talking about Lockheed's photographer at Lockheed, we can actually verify Robert Eminent, I can't really pronounce the last name, was actually at Lockheed. I don't think that would be very difficult. We're going to research him for sure. Anyway, Scully wrote, we'll talk privately with what's going on saucer-wise at Lockheed. I'm like, wait a second. He was talking to people at Lockheed, Wright Field? Okay. And by the way, Scully never published this information. It would have helped his case, but he kept it. You know, back in the old days, journalists were different. They kept their sources secret. They kept their promises. Okay. Now, if you fast forward to 2008, Scully's book gets re-released. There's a well-known UAP paranormal author named Mick Redfern who contributed some sections to the re-release of the book. Mick Redfern issued official FOIA requests to try to pry out official files related to the Aztec crash. Redfield stated in 2008 that some files about Leo Dubois are still classified. So why would files by the supposed hoax still be classified? Quoting Redfern, the FBI released to me 200 pages of file that in itself is at least 400 pages in length, and at least half of which the FBI to this day will not declassify. And parts of the file are still classified in the name of national security 60 years later, which is kind of surprising and often opens up a lot of people's eyes. Well, yeah, so that's 2008. I don't know if anybody's tried since then. Probably run into the same problem. Okay, I already mentioned this. Leonard Stringfield wrote, so completely was Scully's retrieval story put down that some researchers today wonder in retrospect if the book and or its exposure were contrived. And despite denials and suspicions of research, the crash and retrieval stories persisted. Before he died, Stringfield found more witnesses to the Farmington Aztec crash retrieval that appears in his book, UFO Crash Trios, the Inner Sanctum, July 1981. That's the last thing he published when he died. I already mentioned Dr. Robert Sarbacher wrote some interesting stuff. He said, quote, Behind the Flying Saucers book is true and substantially correct. Now I researched when Sarbacher stated that, and it turns out he stated that around 1 week after Scully's book came out. And it's actually kind of hard to find the exact date that Scully's book came out in September 1950. It turns out there's 1 week later. That's interesting. Anyway, Sarbacher wrote the subject classified higher than the H-bomb. Anybody who knows about UAPs would of course know about this now. And he wrote John von Neumann and Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was World War II U.S. R&D, definitely were involved. Possibly Robert Oppenheimer was involved. Eisenhower invited Sarbacher to attend several discussions related to retrievals. Okay. You can see Above Top Secret by Timothy Good, a classic work. And you can also see UFO Crash Retrieval Status Report 3 by Leonard Stringfield for that. So that's Frank Scully. So Frank Scully was the first guy to talk about crash retrievals in a serious way, the first book. So now I'm going to go to the BSRA archive. So the BSRA, this is in Sweden. I contacted these guys during the pandemic. They were hurting at the time because of the pandemic, and they couldn't pay their payroll, and visitors fell down, and book purchase fell and everything. So I'm like, hey, well, let's make a deal. There's something I'm really interested in that you guys got, and so we struck a deal. So the BSRA is the Borderlands Sciences Research Foundation or Association. It was founded in 1947 by a man named Maine Lane. He's a mysterious figure. He's an occultist. He was also an author, and he ran this association of sci-fi. In the late 40s, they consisted of sci-fi authors, psychics, mediums, channelers. He started a little newsletter right after World War II, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. He's interesting because some of his memoranda appear, or BSRA's memoranda appear in official FBI archive files, specifically in 1947 and 1952. When I saw that these files were in official FBI archives, like, wait a second, what? And then I looked at the dates that they were in there. They were key dates in U.S. history. They were July 8th, 1947, which is Roswell Day, and July 1952, which was the DC overflights. So I started investigating, like, oh, what's going on here? Can we get their archives? Well, it turns out you can. You can only get them in person officially, but if you talk to the AFU, the SC Archives for the Unexplained, it's the biggest paranormal UAP archive in the world, probably outside of the Vatican anyway, out in Sweden. If you talk to them, you can gain access to the internal archive. Okay, so Maid Lane was not a scientist or mathematician, but an academician who strayed into borderland science and psychic research. And it turns out I've talked to modern authors who know all about this, and they're telling me that Maid Lane, at least in the later days before he died, was actually several people, not just one guy. It was by the time in the 50s, late 50s, UAPs were big, and so they had a lot of work to do apparently. So they wanted to print short articles, data, items of various kinds supplied by our members, perhaps a few notes of each time of the Fortean variety. They were sci-fi authors. I already covered this, mediums, remote viewers, or what we would now call remote viewers. Back then, the term did not exist in the 40s and 50s. Turns out back then, Maid Lane was very patriotic, and he forwarded, and we can prove this, key information to the U.S. government. Maid Lane started receiving BSRA started receiving UFO reports in October 46 from the United States. They sent them into newspapers in October 46, and we have those articles. So BSRA, I find this fascinating. Somehow the BSRA was able to accurately predict that a big wave of UAPs was coming, and they warned the public in 46. So here on this slide, I cover one of the key memoranda that the BSRA people gave to the U.S. government, provably. So this is right from the FBI's official vault. It's July 8, 1947. The BSRA warns the U.S. government that do not shoot at these things. They apparently have some sort of occupants. They have some sort of weapon potentially. They're like, hey, don't shoot at these things. Now this is interesting. This is dated July 8, 47. So this would have been right before the Roswell announcement. So at the time this was written, as far as I can determine, the BSRA issued this, and then it wound up in the FBI's archive, and they sent it to a whole bunch of people in the U.S. government and Congress and whatever. So from what I can determine, the BSRA folks were doing their best to figure out what was really going on, and they were issuing memoranda to the U.S. government, trying to explain and help them out. Here's what we think is going on. Okay, so I went through there's thousands and thousands of documents in the BSRA archive. It's a fascinating picture of what was going on from their perspective in 1947 all the way into late 90s. And so in there, I found these 3 pieces of paper. And I was like, what's this? It looks like a mailing list. On these, mostly handwritten, but there's some typewritten stuff on here. There's all these representatives and Air Force figures, U.S. Army, intelligence. It goes on and on and on. But on the 3rd page, this is, by the way, during the beginning of the Korean War. This is secret information. I could not find any of this information in their public borderland journals and stuff. In there, on the 3rd page at the bottom, it says Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, Commander, Armed Forces in Alaska, Elmdorf Air Force Base, Anchorage, Alaska. I'm like, wait a second, where have I heard of Twining before? That's Nathan Twining. He's MJ-12. So during the Korean War, and by the way, on this mailing list, it says key list, Russian war situation, Korean, July 4th, 1950. So like, wow, that's really, they're sending Korean War information to the U.S. government.
So you're saying that Nathan R. Twining, General Nathan R. Twining, the General Nathan R. Twining, was corresponding with European psychics.
American psychics.
Psychics.
And by the way, I don't know if it went back and forth. I have no evidence of that. However, I know for sure that the BSRA had his mailing information in typewritten, so it's very clear, in their internal mailing list for 1950. Now, maybe Nathan just threw it out. I have no idea. I don't have the back and forth, right? However, I want to point out there that some in their archive, this is my Medium, some of these people on this mailing list wrote letters back and responded, and that they weren't just form letter responses. They weren't just being blown off. Some of these senators or congressmen, whatever, did find their reports very interesting. Unfortunately, it was secret communications. I don't know what they were sending to the U.S. government about the Russian war situation. To my knowledge, it doesn't appear in their journals. But just the fact that Twining is in their mailing list, I find fascinating. So Twining's long been rumored to be part of what Corso would call the UFO working group. Lieutenant Colonel Corso, he wrote a book called The Day After Roswell in the early 90s about the retrievals. But this just the fact that Twining is in their mailing list, I find fascinating. So Twining's long been rumored to be part of the UFO working group. Lieutenant Colonel Corso, he wrote a book called The Day After Roswell in the early 90s about the retrievals. Twining was receiving information from psychics. That's interesting because many decades later, there was something called Project Stargate. And I don't know a whole lot about Stargate. I think you actually, Sean, would know more about it than me if you've met or interviewed some of those people. Rote viewers have been giving information to the U.S. government throughout history. It's happened. And so we have some indications that the mediums and psychics.
The interesting, so I'm not sure exactly where the direct link is between the BSRA is and the U.S. government's remote viewing program. But if I had to guess, I know that Russell Targ, who was one of the scientists, he was actually a laser physicist who was working with Ingo Swann, was a member of something called the Theosophical Society. So that may have been where connections were made with that community. But again, I'm just speculating, but that's kind of informed speculation.
Yeah, and there's also rumors that the Soviets had their own programs. So it would make sense. Of course, we have a remote viewing gap. We have to have ours. So it just goes to show you, though, when you're going through a big archive, 99% of the documents are boring, but it's that 1% you're just looking for little things like this. You're like, wait a second. Nobody knew. Like if you go through the Borderland official journals, they had issues, I think, every quarter. They didn't talk about this kind of stuff. They were communicating behind the scenes the information to major figures and stuff like that. By the way, to compose a list like this in 1950 would have been a bunch of work. It would have been serious work. Like a lot of this information.
You go to the internet, like you actually have to go through a security apparatus. It's not like General Nathan R. Twining's giving out his address, especially when you're kind of in that era of paranoia in the Cold War, McCarthy era.
Yeah,
you have Russian spies everywhere, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so BSRA through the years issued special reports, and they made claims that there were saucers at Edwards, just like a guy named Frank Edwards, the broadcaster. So back in the early 50s, it was, if you go through, I have thousands of letters from people that were sent to the Borderlands folks and to Frank Scully, fan letters. It was well known in the 1950s that we had saucers, that they crashed, and we had occupants in custody. And the UAP people, the flying saucer people, they knew. Everybody, this is all common knowledge. It was announced on the radio. Millions of people heard it. It's all forgotten now. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. One of the things I've been doing in my research was trying to figure out, does anybody corroborate this information? Corroboration is really powerful. And is anybody that we can research and verify really did work in the military or for the U.S. government? Has anybody corroborated? It turns out, yes, actually, there have been some people. And so Stephen Greer, a well-known figure, he released a book around 2001 called Disclosure. There was also a press conference, I think, right before 9/11 about flying saucers and UAPs, crash retrievals, etc. So I went through this book and I found all the witnesses. And I'm like, okay, can I just easily figure out, can I verify any of these witnesses? Can I actually find any witness who for sure worked for the United States Air Force or the CIA or Lockheed or whatever? It turns out there are two that are definitely were either the United States Marine Corps or United States Air Force. One of them was Donald Phillips. He was ex-USAF. He said he was ex-CIA. I can't prove that he was the CIA, but I know for sure he was in the Air Force. And he was also Lockheed Skunk Works. And the guy named William G. Uhouse or Bill Uhouse. He was U.S. Marine Corps for sure, a Korean War vet. Okay, so one of the key whistleblowers on this part of the disclosure project, Greer's Disclosure Project, was witness Don Phillips. Now I went through the newspaper archives looking for anything. And so what I first did to zero in on Don is I built his ancestry profile on ancestry.com. Anybody can do this. It's all public information. He's deceased. And I figured out who his father was, and his family and stuff like that. I have all the names. And so I can easily just plug them into newspapers.com and okay, let's find some stuff, right? I found his middle name. I found his birth date. Okay, who he was the son of, etc. Well, it turns out, he was. He was assigned to an air station in Nevada in 1965. His father was proud of his son and made sure it was in newspapers. And there's many more articles, by the way. I'm just putting that out there. It's we can prove this man was in the Air Force for sure. So he appears on video, and you can easily find this guy. Now, what did he say? This is the key thing. He said, and I quote him, "I will say by this camera and this sound that it was President Eisenhower that had this meeting. And it was on film, sort of like what we were doing now." He said there was quote him, "We have records from 1954 that there were meetings between our leaders of this country and ETs here in California." As I understand it from the written documentation, we were asked if we would allow them to be here and do research, blah, 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 blah. Well, this is what Don Phillips says on video, and it's also in the disclosure book and stuff like that. So wait a second, this was relatively recently. This is something like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. He said this. This corroborates the Borderland folks and their claims that weird things were going on at Edwards Air Force Base. Okay, that's really interesting. I've also researched Bill Uhouse as well, and I didn't find as much good stuff that proves, other than he worked for the he was at the he was USMC and he was a Korean War vet. I have a picture of him with a general. I think later at the end of these slides, bonus slides. So and Uhouse, by the way, was corroborated by Don Phillips. Uhouse actually was involved in some sort of flying disc simulation program. Okay, so let's go forward here. I'm going to move to a famous man named Stanton Friedman who passed away a few years ago. He's a nuclear physicist. He was a ufologist. He appeared endless times on documentaries, radio, news, and stuff like that about flying saucers and crash in Roswell and things like that. And so he said many times, and I heard him, radar rockets, nukes are really important. Well, I started researching all these things. Like, why is that important? Well, it turns out radar's history is fuzzy. So in key 1940s developments, radar, rockets, nukes, and digital computers. So I'm looking at the 40s specifically because we have that big flap, the big wave of June, July 1947. A whole bunch of very important things happened in the 40s. It was a key time in human history. So during World War II, we have what appears to be a secret radar moon bounce. The first radar moon bounce occurred before Wikipedia says it did, and encyclopedias. I find that really interesting. I'll show that in a little bit. 1944, approximately, the V2 reaches space. The Germans did it first. Some say it actually occurred during the war. I can't actually narrow that down. I don't really know when the V2 really reached space. It happened around 44. 1945, 1945, of course, you got the Trinity explosion, the Japan A-bomb attack. So that's first time in human history. We have 1945, the ENIAC electronic computer was announced, a digital computer. 1946, we have Project Diana, which is the claimed first moon radar bounced. And here's a picture, some newspaper photos. This was a big deal in 1946. Radar signals hit moon, flashback. That's one of the press release announcements. U.S. Army contacts moon by radar. Australia also claims feat done. But when Australia, and I covered that in a second, we have an Australian man who's working for the U.S. government. He said, we did that back in late 41. So if you research radar, you'll find that the actual history of radar, real history, and the public knowledge of radar and official history diverged. Okay, 6/7/1946, we have the Abel and Baker A-bomb tests. 1046, radar's first used to detect meteors. Coincidentally, the first West Coast UAP sightings. And in here, by the way, all throughout 46 in spikes, there were ghost rocket sightings in Europe. 1046, the first photos taken from space. I have that right here. I actually didn't realize, I never actually seen this. This is the first photo taken from space. It is basically, people listening by radio. It's a black and white photo from orbit. And it was taken on a V2 rocket. And I find this fascinating. I've never seen it.
So we were still using German V2 rockets back in 46?
We were using German V2 rockets in 46, 1947, 1948. Actually, I have all the rocket tests in the chronology from Wikipedia, scraped it from there. We were using German V2 rockets for some testing in the early 1950s, very early 1950s. Yeah, so these V2 rockets were super advanced. And by the way, in 1947, all hell was breaking loose at White Sands. Around this time, I have newspaper clippings for this. There was supposedly an accident with fueling a V2, and I don't know if it really was an accident or not. I think it was a part of the cover-up, but who knows? So, by the way, early July 1947. They were going to test the V2 there, and they canceled it and everything because White Sands was being overflown by UAPs. Okay, and then 1947, all hell breaks loose over Canis, Canada and Mexico. Canis is the continental United States. So as I said, the moon radar bounce was a big deal. Here's Project Diana was a very big deal because this was before the moon landings. Like, we needed radar to get to the moon. We all knew it. And there's many newspaper articles in early 46 talking about this. We needed radar to get to space. So this was a stepping stone, a major stepping stone. And also, this is a big deal for radio and science and astronomy. Bouncing a radar signal off the moon verified many different things about how far the moon actually was, how it was moving, all that stuff. It was a big deal. So they had an official logo and everything like that. By the way, the moon bounce occurred. Apparently, the main signal was sent from southern New Jersey. I've heard rumors in various books that they also sent signals from White Sands. I'm still researching that. 12 million watts effective radiated power. Well, it turns out if you look at the history of Project Diana, that's January 46th, the public announcement, it's fuzzy. So as I was researching the event of 1947, the flyover and everything, I did a deep literature a scan for everything with any kind of keyword hits related to UAPs. Well, a lot of information started flooding out. Some of it, I think, was classified, or it was, back then. There's a man named Dr. Oliver J. Lee, Dearborn Observatory, Northwestern University. That's actually where a famous, not Menzel, but Hynek was from. He said on July 6, 47 in newspapers that the disk might represent the same sort of thing as sending radar signals to the moon, quote, one of the greatest technological achievements of the war and accomplished in absolute secrecy, unquote. Wait a second. There was no radar bounce during World War II. Well, actually, he said there was. I'm like, wait a minute, is there any proof of this? Well, yes. It's interesting. So there's corroboration. I'm going to skip my slides a little bit. Okay. Turns out there's another guy who said the same thing. So there's not just one guy, there's two. And now in historical research, one guy could just be a flake, right? Well, no, we have another fellow here. We have his name, former Australian Army Major W.E. Osborne, who was engaged in secret research for the U.S. government. He told reporters that Australian scientists working at Sydney University, working with Dr. Pennington, made radar contact with the moon several times during October and November of 41. He said that experimental high-power radar equipment with an extremely short microwave was used, and the interval was 2.4 seconds. That was in January 46. So, wait a second. Well, it turns out that's plausible. So if you look at the history, the official history of Project Diana, they used early World War I Pearl Harbor class radar equipment. It was technologically achievable in 41. Okay, but it's even more interesting. There's a guy named Dr. Donald Menzel. Now, if you know much about UAPs, you know about this figure. He's from Harvard Observatory. He was a debunker. He wrote several books. He was obsessed with debunking UAPs. Here's a slide here showing his obsession in the media. He wrote several books debunking UAPs. He said they were spots in front of your eyes. They were soap bubbles. It is insanity, in my opinion. This is crazy. Like, some of it is like, come on now. You're saying that expert pilots, military men, radar operators, sometimes simultaneously spotting these from the ground by radar in the air are seeing soap bubbles. Come on, dude. Well, anyway, Dr. Menzel is a major figure because he was debunking UAPs continually throughout the 50s and 60s. Well, Dr. Donald Menzel was also involved in the initial calculations for the moon radar bounce in 41, according to a French chronology called RR0, which I've translated with AI. I'm still researching this and trying to find more evidence of it, but if you look at official biographies about Donald Menzel, Menzel was a radar radio expert. He would have been the man in the 40s to consult. He was a very intelligent man. And I have pictures here in the next slide. Here's a picture in 35, Menzel visiting with Einstein at Harvard Observatory after receiving an honorary degree. And then another picture of him with another major figure from UAPs, Dr. Menzel of Menzel Gap fame. We'll explain that in a bit. Pictured with Edward Condon of the flawed 1968 Condon report, which was a cover-up. So Menzel was in elite circles. So it turns out the physicist and ufologist Stanton Friedman researched Menzel in the late 80s, and he claimed that Menzel had a secret life. He claimed it in one of his papers called The Secret Life of Donald H. Menzel, that Menzel worked for the NSA and had a crypto clearance. And it turns out he did. So if you research the more up-to-date declassified documents, you can go to the NSA's own website, nsa.gov, their portal. You plug in Menzel, Donald, and boom, it pops up. It was declassified in 2014. He was a NSA special. He was on an NSA specialist list in 54. He had a crypto clearance. He was on an advisory board. This is from the NSA's, the U.S. government's own website. So at this point, we know that what Stanton Friedman published in the late 80s about Menzel having a secret life were true. And the reason why this is important is because Menzel was long rumored to be MJ-12, part of the UFO working group or the control group, as some would call him. And also Menzel was a notorious debunker. But Menzel didn't tell the people, the U.S. public in the 50s and 60s, that he had a super top secret clearance and he worked at all these labs and stuff like that. And he worked for the U.S. government. There's a conflict of interest here, is what basically Stanton Friedman said, and I totally agree with him. And so Friedman, by the way, wasn't, to my knowledge, was not aware of this NSA specialist list. So, by the way, we also have pay stubs. And I could not find. I have a pay stub pictured right here for him. I could not find on their website where this pay stub appears. It's okay because we have the specialist list. So, but anyway, in the pay stub, he's consultant paid $50 per day. Fort Meade, Maryland. Okay, so Menzel is a key figure. So it turns out something new has come up. There's something called astronomical transients. And so I'm not an astronomer, but from what I understand, the astronomers can take photos of the sky at intervals, and then they can analyze these photos either by hand or with computer software, and they can determine that, the star seemed to disappear or appear for a short period of time. Well, it turns out when Washington, D.C. was being overflown in July 1952, there was an astronomical transient spotted on these things called it's called plates. They were basically large negatives or something. And there's an astronomer, and I'm going to probably wreck her last name, Dr. Beatrice Varello. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. She and other astronomers are researching.
I'll try. It's like Via Royale or something like that.
Yeah, sorry.
I probably screwed it up too.
We'll just call her Beatrice. So yeah. Dr. Beatrice Valero, she's found two things, and I actually was texting with her earlier to verify this, and I did show her the slide. She recommended that I put some links in here, which I have done. It's in the PDF. So Menzel destroyed 1/3 of the Harvard plate collection in end of 52, including some logbooks. Now, it's important. This occurred at the end of 52. This would be after Washington, D.C. was overflown, but before the 1950 Robinson panel, when the security lid really clamped down. So if you read some key authors from that era, the U.S. government got super paranoid after D.C. was overflown, which was understandable, and they clamped down on the secrecy about UAPs. So Menzel destroyed 1/3 of the Harvard plate collection, including some logbooks. These are the notes that I've just taken down earlier. You can look at, there's a memoir, there's a book, you can read about that. And then in 1953 to 67, he stops astronomers from saving photographic plates. The explanation was, we can't afford to do this. But it's awfully weird that, I'm going to show some graphs in a bit, during the worldwide, all history peak of UFO sightings or UAP sightings, we don't have the plates. And it's called, the astronomers call this the Menzel gap. And I researched this myself to verify it. I went to archive.org. I looked for Menzel gap in quotes. There's an astronomical paper here, opening the 100-year window for time-domain astronomy. In there is a graph, and it says this is the Menzel gap period. You can see a clear gap, a lack of data in the 1960 or so period. So this is a big deal in astronomy. They call it the Menzel gap. Now, this gets deeper. So some will blow this off because it's from the Soviet Union. I don't. In the late 60s, there was a little window where the Soviet experts UAP experts were talking to Condon Report experts. At the University of Colorado, if I remember right. And Soviet UAP expert Dr. Felix Ziegel, he stated, quote, UAPs, quote, leave distinct images on photographic plates. And I have a link to the newspaper article, which he wrote, which was all Western newspapers. So the Soviet Union themselves was having, it appears to me, if you look at the newspaper articles and books, back in the late 60s, they realized that Menzel's debunking books, where's one of the books right here, they realized Menzel was lying. Ziegel saw through it, and he published an article about it. It turns out Menzel himself had a UAP sighting in the late 40s. So he's a bit of a hypocrite. And the Soviets figured out, wait a second, Menzel's lying here. These things are real. And they leave distinct images on photographic plates. Okay, so going back to Stanton Friedman, the ufologist who passed away a few years ago, he said radar was very important. Well, yeah, it turns out radar's history is fuzzy, like I was talking about. And I have a newspaper article where I got the key quote. Once I saw, so it seems like as the nation was being overflown, some secrets started to leak out. Okay, I already talked about this. Australian former Army major came forward corroborating Dr. Oliver J. Lee. So yeah, okay. So it appears to me that Project Diana was just a narrative. It was just a show. It was right after World War II. I mean, we just went through an extremely traumatic time. And in 46, if you go through the newspaper archives, you can see they were telling the public space is a big deal. We're going to the moon. We can bounce radar waves off the moon now. We can bounce radar off rockets. We're going. This is going to be big. Okay. So next section. So I've been going through not only newspaper archives and other, public and private archives, whatever, but also going through chronologies and databases. There's a key figure. Most people don't know about him yet. His name's Larry Hatch. He, over a period of 15 to 17 or so years, he started compiling a database of UAP reports in a different way than other databases. He went laboriously through U.S. government reports, newspapers, books, journals, magazines, and he just made a huge database. It was encoded, so because it was back in the DOS era, he only had a few megabytes to work with on floppy disks. So all his reports had to be condensed, but he did have all the book and article references, page numbers, everything's attributed. Now, when I first started going through Larry Hatch's database, I'm going to be honest, I didn't believe it. It's like these reports are incredible. Multiple person reports, mass sightings, all kinds of crazy shit was going down back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. I didn't believe it. So I started buying random books that he referred to, and I did random spot checks. Larry Hatch's database, which is around 22,000 events, is public. He gave permission for it to be made public, so is his family. It's accurate. And accurate meaning that everything's attributed and we can find those original reports. Also, Dr. Jacques Vallée, a well-known figure in this space, referred to his database in one of his papers. I have a link to it there. Also, it was a review of his database product in a MUFON journal. I also found letters and stuff from him talking to other people about his database. The good news is we have all his database. Everything's been preserved. We haven't lost anything. It's probably one of the most important independent collections of UFO sightings in existence right now. Okay, but there are other sources of UAP sightings.
Rich, quick question. Can you go back to that last slide? So what's the significance of, the question, are UFO events related to sidereal time? Because for folks who don't know, sidereal time is timing correlated by stars, like the movement of stars, rather than the movement of planets. Why is there a distinction there?
I think, I haven't read the paper in any detail yet, but I think if they were correlated with sidereal time, then there would be some sort of relationship between UAP sightings and astronomical phenomena. And I think that's a great question to ask. Is there a correlation? And so there's a paper I linked to it. You can read about it. And Vallée used the UDB database to come up with a bunch of data about that. And so I haven't read this at any level yet. I just found this actually.
Rich, you see that number right now with Solite? See that number?
Yeah, sorry. 1 sec. Yeah, go ahead.
1111.
Nice. Nice synchronicity.
Welcome to my world. Anyway,
nice.
Keep going.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, so the paper's linked to there, and I will post the slide URL on Twitter as well. Okay. So here's the thing. I have a big library of UFO books. I've been buying them at a breakneck pace because they're like $5 each in many cases now. I think they're good investments. And I found one book, and randomly I was just paging through the book, and I'm like, oh, wait a second. NICAP catalog. It says here in the book, Investigating UFOs by Kettle Camp, page 48. It says NICAP catalog, 850 sightings in the United States from a wave in the summer of 47. I'm like, well, that's not true. Wait a second. I have the NICAP database. Anybody can get it now. And it only has 100 reports for 47. So where are the 750 reports? I can't find them. Well, I'm not the only one that can't find them. So there's the SCU, which is Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. And it's a group of scientists investigating a UAP situation and having meetings about it, events, and issuing papers. They, too, have 100 reports listed for NICAP. And you can see there's 3 graphs here. They have U.S. Air Force data, which I believe is Blue Book data. They have Sparks report, and then they have the NICAP data. And they only list 147. Now, there's something very important about these graphs. If you notice, there's a big spike in 52. 52 is one of the peak years of human history that we know about for UAP sightings. 67, that spike makes sense too. And there's a little spike 57. Okay, that makes sense. However, what does not make sense is that 47 is only about 100. There's something wrong. If you look at the other data that they have compiled here in their paper, wait a second, there's only like 75, 80 for the Sparks report, and Blue Book is approximately 100 or so. Something's wrong, because we know for sure there was a big spike in 47, and I found a bunch of corroboration for that. I'm going to list that. So I don't know why SCU is using this flawed data, and it doesn't make any sense to me. If the 47 data is flawed, then how can you trust any of the other data, and how can any of their conclusions be accurate? All right, so let's see what Larry Hatch has. So what I did is I went through using an open source tool.
Well, Rich, let me stop you right there. Quick question. How long has SCU been around?
Only, to my knowledge, only a few years now, but I'm not positive. Only like 5 years at most, approximately. I'm not 100% sure, but they have
members of the intelligence community attend those presentations?
I went to an SCU event, and there were members of the intelligence community there. Also, the person who runs SCU works for the U.S. Army, and he claimed he has a security clearance. So I don't know. I'm just reporting. I'm just sticking to the data. The data there.
Yeah, I think my question. I think the answer to my question answers the meta question behind that question itself, and people can figure it out.
Yeah. Now, in their defense, if I was going to start as a basic analysis, like I was a beginner with training wheels, I would probably start with the NICAP data. Look at the Blue Book data, but I would move on very rapidly because we have much better data sets available. Jacques Vallée, was apparently involved in a little bit. We have better data now. So if I was doing an analysis trying to show UAPs were real and they were flying over sensitive installations, I would look at the better data we have now, modern data. So UDB database is some of this modern data. Now, if you generate a histogram, and this is basically counting for each day how many reports we have, these are unique reports, you can clearly see that it spikes. For people on radio, you can see it spikes up at July 8th, July 7th, July 6th, 1947. Now, the Roswell of July. So, yeah, the Roswell announcement was on July 8th. Right before the Roswell announcement, it spikes up. Now, Dr. Brandenburg, a plasma physicist, appeared in a program a few days ago, and he said that the whole country was overflown. And I'm seeing a lot of evidence that we were overflown. Big wave, and the reports just kept flooding in, and there was definitely a form of hysteria that evolved too. It's interesting if you go through. Okay, the next thing. If you go through a whole bunch of data sets, the peak is July 7th or July 8th, 1947. For not only 1947, but it's one of the all-time historical peaks for UAP events or sightings. Some of these are, I would classify more as events because they come from the U.S. military itself. So there's a really important report from Dr. James E. McDonald, an atmospheric physicist, and Ted Blecher. And this is called the Report of the 1947 UFO Wave. Great things from the late 60s. Here's the other thing. He has a histogram in here. I love histograms. And it's because I use these histograms to just debug all of my tools when I'm just, working on data.
I love the squiggle too, because folks with that squiggle.
So that squiggle means that the graph went so high and it's off the page. It will be off the page if they, this linear graph, it's not a log graph. So that's how many reports came in. So in one day, it looks like around the 7th or 8th, they had 160 reports. That's significant because if you go to the SCU data, they have for the entire year only around approximately 100 reports, the 90 reports. So wait a second, we got a problem.
Now let me play devil's advocate, okay? Now I don't think this is the real reason, but do you think that they went through these reports and tried to, to reduce the number by attempting to not double count, i.e., like look at single?
So I think to answer your question. So for sure, in this report, you can read it. James McDonald and Ted called the people and tracked them down and interviewed them. And their interviews appear in the report. These are unique reports as well in Larry Hatch's database. Additionally, I would make this argument is that there is so much history of disinformation, misinformation, hoaxes, that every single report must be preserved accurately. No report should be thrown away. my opinion, any claim of a UAP sighting, especially in key eras, key dates or time periods, must be preserved accurately. Anybody throwing reports is either censored, in my opinion, censoring them or engaged in a cover-up. Something's wrong. So we have a history here of reports disappearing. For example, make another example. Project Blue Book would instant. This is well known. I have links to this. They would throw away any report involving a claimed landing. Now that's bullshit, because in the summer of 47, in the newspaper archives, there was the U.S. military itself investigating claimed landings out in Washington State. So Blue Book would throw away a whole category of as a toss reports. So we're basically now in 2024 downstream of a lot of censorship, a lot of throwing away reports. So my approach for this is I do not delete any reports whatsoever. Everything has to be preserved accurately. So this is the thing. This is key. Now this is important because NICAP, James McDonald, Blue Book did not have this data. If you go on the newspapers.com database, and anybody can do this, you can narrow each search result down by day, and you search for, quote, flying saucer or flying disc with a C or K, you can generate a histogram of reports. And you'll see that in newspapers.com, you can generate a histogram. This histogram closely matches the shape and the spike and the kind of like the aggressiveness of the spike of many other databases here. And by the way, I have more databases than this, and this shape is in all of the major ones, the ones that we've compiled.
In mathematics, they would call that function, or at least it would approximate a Dirac delta function, basically.
Now, yeah, so
like an impulse function, right?
Yeah, so Dr. James McDonald and Ted Bletcher, they didn't have access to, in 1968, or I think it was 67 actually, they didn't have access to modern newspaper databases. And by the way, the newspapers.com people are not going out of their way to compile UFO reports. They're just scanning hundreds of millions, literally, actually a billion pages of newspapers. I find it absolutely fascinating. There's something here. There's some statistics and some science that I'm not an expert in, showing like basically the UFO people were right, is that their reports align with modern newspaper databases. I find this really interesting. So this is more corroboration. By the way, for just late June and July 1947, we have 21,713 total hits for flying disc and flying saucer, which is a lot. It's a surprising amount. That doesn't include Britain, by the way, and Mexico. Actually, let me correct myself. That does. That's for their entire database. Most sightings were in the United States, though. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, okay, now you can say, okay, who cares? Whatever. That's just civilians. It's just newspapers. That's just NICAP. Well, hold on. There's more corroboration for this. Project Saucer was actually called, back in the old days, it was actually Project Sign, but back in 1949, that was secret. It was called Project Saucer in the media. The initial announcement for Project Saucer was on April 27, 1949. U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base issued a memoranda, M26-49, to the newspaper, all the newspapers and stuff like that. And this memorandum was summarized, sometimes quoted verbatim, throughout newspapers throughout the entire country. So quoting from this memorandum, it said, a frequency graph compiled recently, this is the U.S. government saying this, recently shows that saucer sightings began in this country on a small scale in January 47 and reached their peak in July of that year, shortly after the Mount Rainier incident. That's Kenneth Arnold. They then fell off sharply for the rest of the year, but reoccurred in relative frequency in January, July, November of 1948. Well, that's really it. I have all the links to this. You could go read it yourself. It was quoted in newspapers. We have the memo. It's been OCR. You can go look at that. Well, wait a second. That's exactly right. The U.S. government, their conclusion was that if you go generate a histogram of 47, you'll see it peaks in July, just like the U.S. government said. So Project Sign was right. They, too, had their own histograms that they gathered. Now, this is more corroboration for that. So I think we're going in the right direction here for looking at 47. And by the way, SCU is not, in my opinion, going in the right direction because their data does not show any sort of 47 peak. We should have, in my opinion, around 850 to 1,000 sightings for 1947. How much does SCU list? For NICAP, 100. It's bullshit, in my opinion. Okay, so now we're going to zoom back out. Let's zoom out to the worldwide because this is not specific to the United States, this phenomenon. What do the worldwide histograms look like? This is the hash data set. So these are unique reports. So if you look at them, and by the way, this footprint stays pretty firm looking at many of these databases that have been compiled by different authors in different countries. You can look at the peaks. Peak of 40, there's a peak in 47, makes sense. By the way, I don't cover it in this slide before 1940. There actually was a big peak in 1896, 1897. Some people debate that. Fine, we'll just cover the modern era. 1947, 1950, that was the Farmington Armada, early 1950. 52 is a significant year. That's the Washington, D.C. overflight summer. 54 is mostly a French wave, not United States. Remember, this is worldwide. It's well known. Jacques Vallée covered that in some of his earlier books. 57, United States, big wave. Now it starts to die off. Nuke testing. So I've been investigating this. Nuke testing starts to fall off around that time period because the Soviets, United States suspended nuke tests in a certain time period there around that time. Maybe it's coincidence. So in the 60s, this gets interesting to me. If you look at the newspaper archives, if you look at them, the terminology and the public acceptance shifts. The public in the mid-late 60s is no longer shocked and, like, what the fuck? Excuse my language. I don't know, I just cursed. Sorry, man. What the hell's going on? Is that a big deal, by the way, on your show? FCC going to grade me now? Well, I don't know if Sean can apply, but anyway. 70s.
Yeah, as long as you keep it limited, it should be fine. The one thing I wanted to say is 1973. That was when the Pascagoula incident happened.
Yeah,
and for people who, again, this to tie into the nuclear kind of theme, like they made nuclear submarines
nearby
in Pascagoula, right?
Yeah. There's a nuke connection.
Same thing with 1967, 68, right? That's the Malmstrom incident, right?
Yeah, nuclear connection.
So there's, and the other thing too is, imagine if you looked at this kind of post 1992, it's probably also died down a little bit. And again, that's because the last U.S. nuclear test was in 1992, somewhere in Nevada. It was like a very small yield underground test. And the last one the Soviets did, I think, was either 91 or 90.
Yeah,
probably 90.
Stopped in the early 90s, exactly. A lot of things. Looking at the data sets, I have several histograms here. So just so you know, like the overall feel changes over the decades. So in the late 60s, the public started to accept the phenomena. They even had comics all over the newspapers, standard comics, thousands of newspapers, all about UAPs. It was really interesting. And I've put a bunch of them on Twitter and whatever. The 90s and early 2000s is everything. The language and the reports shift. So 70s and 80s are about mystery helicopters, mutilations, and stuff like that. 90s and early 2000s is the era of large, silent, completely silent triangles. Okay, this is the RR0 French chronology, which I translated with OpenAI. Did a great job with that, actually, and then put it in the JSON data and put it on GitHub. It has a different feel to it. It's compiled by apparently one man. And I do notice, though, that he has a 42 spike, which I think is related to the LA incident. 47 there's a spike there. 52, huge spike. 54, a little spike. 57. So the overall feel for this data set, the spikes that I would expect to be there are there. They're not as big as, like, his 47 coverage isn't very good, but 120 sightings. So yeah, so there's something strange about this French chronology, RR0. I don't know what the hell happened to it, but the modern version of this chronology has been trashed. It's unusable. You have to go back to like 20 years ago when it's useful and actually has all the information there. So I just went to I took a snapshot in 2004 and I grabbed all that, I scraped it. Okay, so let's move to newspapers. Just a few little things. Some of these I posted on Twitter, and I've actually had people fight me and say I faked them. So the one on the left, I have links to this, by the way, so you can look at them yourself. The one on the left, Flying Disc Baffles Scientists. This appeared in the Bristol, England. So it's not well known. We didn't have very crude jets in 1947, and they were sent up. And so we sent up our best stuff in 47 to try to chase these things. And on the right, this is the Washington, D.C. events. we sent up jets too. And actually, these jets shot at them, and apparently some materials fell. And so back in those days, all throughout newspapers, the public knew, wow, this is a serious situation. We're sending up jets. We don't send up jets for balloons, by the way. This was a serious situation. So, okay. Going through, I've been through sci-fi. There's a guy named Ray Palmer. He is a well-known early sci-fi author and editor. He pops up in the UAP situation in 47 because he was involved with the Maury Island incident, which occurred a few days approximately before Kenneth Arnold's sighting. And the Maury Island incident was around 6 UAPs that flew over the water near Maury Island. It was witnessed by these people in a child in a boat. Apparently, some materials were dropped on the island in the water. The materials apparently damaged the boat, hurt a child, killed a dog. It was a big deal back then. It was covered a lot in the media. Also, 2 aviators who were investigating the incident passed away. They died in an airplane crash. Like approximately a month or 2 later, they had debris apparently from Maury Island on this plane. It blew up. So anyway, I've been going through a lot of the early published literature related to this. I'm like, wow, okay, what was Ray Palmer interested in 47? In 46? Oh, this guy named Richard Shaver. Who the hell's that? Richard Shaver wrote a bunch of stories. So there was something called the Shaver mystery. It was a big deal back then. The Shaver mystery is basically Doomslayer, the stuff that Dr. Brandenburg was talking about if he was going to your program. It's like underground NHIs and all this stuff like that, whatever. Well, back in the 40s, it was actually science fiction. And it was a big deal, So if you go through Richard Shaver's stories, which were published in Ray Palmer's Amazing Stories magazine, a well-known sci-fi magazine back then, you'll find an article which is not part of what people now call the Shaver mystery. It's actually crash retrieval lore. But hold on, it came out in June 46. There was no Roswell, anything in June 46. There were no UAPs. Actually, this is actually before the Ghost rockets were a big deal. The Ghost rockets came out in around August in US 46. So long before all that stuff happened, Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer were talking about UFO crash retrievals. And I'm quoting from the article. Was thinking of the whole future of science if I could get that ship intact in the hands of American authorities. So what the story was about, it was about the Germans and during World War II had a crashed saucer. Where does that emerge today? That actually, David Grush is talking about stuff like that today. David Grush claimed that in one of his recent interviews, that the Germans, or I think it was the Italians, had a craft, and we had to go get it, and the Vatican was involved and stuff like that. Well, what was this talk? This kind of thing, this idea, first emerged in sci-fi literature in middle of 46. Here are some of the topics. This is an amazing article. It's called Looter Valley. Pre-47, crash retrievals, T-forces. That means World War II, there were secret intelligence forces that we had that would go get Nazi technology and bring it back. Secret R&D programs. Looter Valley covered radar development was accelerator developed from tech found in a crash retrieval. Maybe they meant that metaphorically, but they were basically saying, hey, some of the technology we have, our high technology, is coming from something else. Other things covered: 3 holograms, incredible tech, exotic materials. The great powers intensely fighting over NHI technology. That's in 46. This is like, for 46, this is a super fantastic, very advanced thought. Secret aviation tech used by special forces, years for public knows. And in the article is helicopters. NHI occupants of suspended animation. The tech being patented, civilians immensely profiting. Where's that? That's from, I think, Lieutenant Colonel Corso didn't talk about stuff like that until the 90s. Retrieve tech changing the war's outcome, influencing science. How did Shaver and Ray Palmer know about all this? By the way, I was reading this article. It turns out Richard Shaver didn't write all his pieces. He had collaboration from other people. So this article is really, I think this is an anomaly, is why I have it in my slides here. And I have a link here proving that Shaver worked with other people for sure around the same time period. My theory, it's just a theory, that Shaver was a disclosure conduit or he was being leaked information. I don't think Shaver came up with all these ideas himself. Okay, so let's get to Muroc Air. Let's move forward now. There's rumors about Muroc Airfield, Edwards Air Force Base. There's a picture of it from 46 or so. I purposely filmed from October 46. Okay, so there's been a lot of rumors about shit going down at Edwards Air Force Base. And what I wanted to solve was who was the first person to pick up these rumors? Well, it turns out it was Frank Scully. So it's well known in UAP literature that, this is super well known. There's been whole books written about this. Actually, Sean has interviewed one of the authors of one of these books. That in February 54, supposedly President Eisenhower disappeared and went to Edwards Air Force Base to look at secret aircraft or flying saucers or something like that. Well, the first person to know about some weird shit going on was actually Frank Scully. Frank Scully knew in late 53. He never published any of those rumors. Broadcaster Frank Edwards announced to millions of people that we had captured a disc in California. That, to me, resembles the Roswell announcement of July 8th, 1947, where it was in all nations' newspapers. Hey, we got a flying disc. To me, it seems like they were trying to boost morale, because can you imagine if we really were being overflown, and it certainly appears we were, that would hurt morale. But being told that we had captured one, captures military terminology, would boost morale. So that's cool. So we have ex-naval intel officer notes early 54 that we had captured a saucer, occupants in custody. Now, it turns out, coincidentally, the U.S.'s largest H-bomb test was going on at around this time, called Castle Bravo, which, by the way, was a huge radiological disaster. There's Japanese fishermen, I think, were injured in this test and stuff like that. So at the same time, the biggest H-bomb test of U.S. history was happening. And then a few weeks after that H-bomb test, Scully writes a typewritten note. And I have it up here somewhere here. I'll show it in a second. Quote, the Edwards Air Force item is completely true. Further data reveals that they still have the flying saucer held in Hangar 27. Apparently, the man is still under custody. Back in those days, they didn't call them ETs or Greys. They called them men. Okay. Now, in 454, a famous letter, I have somewhere here. Here it is. Gerald Light supposedly visits Edwards Air Force Base and sees flying saucers and issues this memo, which comes out through the BSRA people, the Maid Lane organization. And he thought President Eisenhower was going to announce it officially, which is interesting. So it's like why does Eisenhower keep pop up in modern times that he was involved in the situation and back then? Eisenhower's a key guy. So I'm go back a little bit here. In this open source work I've been doing, I've been generating what they call quick indices. That means keywords in context. So what that basically is, it's an old-fashioned search engine, really. It's like what you would do in 1950s if you wanted to build a searchable index of information. So for what I have here in the slide is, for every instance of Edwards, I have a link to a document. It's sorted chronologically, and I also have the context of how that word appeared in the context of literature. And I started looking at in my event chronology and a bunch of other sources. How many times was Edwards Air Force Base appears? And it appears a hell of a lot. There was a lot going on at Edwards back in those days related to flying saucer rumors, Eisenhower mysteriously visiting, and things like that. Okay. So quoting Frank Scully, you can go to University of Wyoming and see this yourself, box 3FF1. Quote, a life pilot was captured. So this is Scully News by 11/20/1953. In these notes, you can also read that the U.S. government was having meetings with major industrialists and big corporations about the situation as well. He was picking up these rumors, and he never published it. I don't think he believed them himself. Okay, naval intelligence started getting involved, or ex-naval intelligence. But I don't know if really is such a thing. So January 24th, 54, quote, a saucer and a being of a saucer in custody at Edwards Air Base. And I have the notes here in the slides. You could read them yourself. It's really interesting. So this naval intel guy went to Edwards, was not allowed in. He starts fishing around the local bars. He just starts knocking on doors, and he starts picking up all these rumors. Many people were poking around. Okay, 3/24/54, Scully notes. He notes the Edwards Air Force, I just read this earlier, was completely true. I find it's interesting that he put down Building 27, because many years later, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a movie called Hangar 8. I think it was called Hangar 18. It was very popular in the Soviet Union, but it was an American movie. The movie was about a saucer in a hangar. This is interesting because this note you're looking at here, to my knowledge, nobody has seen this since 1950s. So I'm the first to get it scanned and to put it on the web and just look at it and read it. Nobody bothered to scan this stuff. So I find it interesting. There's been rumors in the American system that we had a saucer in a hangar for a long time. Okay, I already mentioned this earlier. This is Gerald Light's famous little memo here. It turns out, by the way, his memo is 2 pages. The second page is not related to these saucers. It's more about political stuff at the time.
Really quick question. So Gerald Light, I think in a prior slide, it mentioned that he was an adherent to this Gurdjieff character.
Yes.
Now, when I interviewed Whitley Strieber is also an adherent of Gurdjieff.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Well, I don't know much about Strieber. However, I know a bunch about this pseudonym Gerald Light. He was an occultist. He was Maid Lane told all his readers that Gerald Light was the real deal. Gerald Light had some sort of attack in the around early 1950, I think it was early mid 1950. It was like, what do they call it? The Havana syndrome like attack. I'm going to turn my air conditioner on a second because I'm getting hot in here. But yeah, I'm not really sure what the significance is. It might be just a coincidence, right? But it has something to do with meditation, occultism. It's a secretive organization. It still exists. You can find their website. I'm going to turn my air conditioner on. Hope you don't hear that. Okay. So by the way, this is important. So it's interesting. I'm looking at two archives. Both archives converge around an incident at Edwards Air Force Base, which is later referenced by that state representative that I pointed out. I find that really interesting. And by the way, I cannot find any evidence that Frank Scully, who was Catholic, a very religious man, had any connection to BSRA, Maid Lane, or Light. I believe Frank Scully would have considered them occultists back in the 50s. That would be like kind of like, devil worship or something. I don't think Frank Scully would talk to those guys, and there's no evidence that he was.
Well, keep in mind there is a mystical tradition in Catholicism that is not spoken of to kind of the masses, but if you look at the lives of some of the saints like Teresa of Avila, and like there's a lot of description of remote viewing like capabilities, like Father Pedro Pia also had a lot of these remarkable abilities. So there is a tradition. The Catholic Church just doesn't advertise it, but
got it. Oh, they also have their what is it? When they get rid of demons, casting out demons.
Exorcisms. Yeah,
there's
a right.
So.
There's a rite of exorcism, and I've interviewed people on the podcast who have been present at these, and they're real. Like they're not.
Yeah.
They go through, and they kind of go through all the psych work, and they try to
they're
rule
not mentally
everything
ill.
out.
They try to rule it out. Yeah, they rule out mental illness.
Well, and the other disturbing thing is they used to only train priests in Rome, but over the last 2 or 3 decades, they've had to start schools in the United States because the problem has, let's just say, festered. Yeah, it's gotten a lot worse. So I don't know what's going on, but like, look, I don't want to be off on the deep end, but all this stuff is related.
Oh, of course,
in some way.
Of course, yes, yeah, and I reading the Borderlands people. I'm sure in their journals somewhere over the decades, they talked about this kind of stuff. I'm sure they did. So other rumors. So June 4th, 1954, Leonard Stringfield, who's Army Air Force Intelligence, who was later well known for crash retrieval research. He published in his newsletter, which was sent to Scully. That's how I found it. He was told the U.S. government had captured this. This was in June of 1954, and what he wrote was really interesting. He said. This is Leonard Stringfield. However, this writer believes that if such discs are in captivity, it is understandable why the Air Force, in this instance, would prefer secrecy. Information regarding the disc propulsion, metal, and structure would be, quote, sugar in the hands of the Russians. He's right. We would keep it. This would be above top secret. This would be at the same level, if not higher, than H-bombs. Because people don't realize, like, history here, the history of A-bombs. The Soviets stole our A-bomb plants in the late 40s. And that was extremely traumatic to our
I don't know about stole, but the Rosenbergs gave it to them. Right.
Well, whatever. They got them.
Right.
They found a way to get them. It was very traumatic. And there were spies all over White Sands area. It's well known in the late 40s. Our sensitive installations, like it was a very big deal back then. The Soviets they pay people and they're very active. So I can understand why they would want to keep this shit secret, ignoring the panic aspect. People panicking that these things are actually real. So anyway, 2010, I'm going to zoom all the way to 2010 now. You can find the clip. I have links to it. This guy comes out of nowhere. This state rep nobody really heard of. Henry W. McElroy. He says Eisenhower was briefed, and he said a meeting occurred. And I'm like, what the hell is going on with this guy? So I did actually research this guy, and he had an unfortunate life, actually. What happened now is before he released this video, and I have a Medium article about this. I did some research on his background in newspapers and other places, public archives. His life collapsed. His wife left him. He lost his house. The IRS attacked him. He apparently was a controversial figure in New Hampshire politics. And sometime after this event occurs in his life, he releases this video. There's some people think that these events are related. He fired back. That's what some people think. I don't know what to think. I'm just a commentator here, but it's interesting. So he had a falling out, and he appeared at a fort and said that Eisenhower was briefed and all this stuff, and he disappeared. I don't know what happened to him after that. Okay, and so this is the last thing on my main presentation here. I didn't cover this in the contact with other slides. I found some new information about the Maury Island incident, and it's a very old incident. It's been covered to death. Okay. A couple things that I found. First, I'll cover what it is real fast. This was called Security Matter X by the FBI. We know that now because we have the declassified documents. It's this old information from 47. June 21st, 1947. I'm going to say approximately. I don't know if we really know the true date. 3 days before Kenneth Arnold's famous formation sighting on the 24th, a guy named Harold Dahl, he was a logger with a boat. He was on a logging patrol boat. It was really a logging boat. They were looking for logs in the area that fell into the water. They were very expensive, and they were worth something. He was patrolling near Mary Island. His dog, son, and 2 crewmen on the boat. This is the story. He claims to have spotted a roughly 6 to 9 very large donut-shaped craft. Not this exactly. One of the objects starts spewing thousands of pieces of material resembling lava rocks. Some fell on their boat, killing his dog and injuring his son. I've looked through hospital records of the era in newspapers and stuff like that. I cannot find any evidence that his child went to the hospital. Doesn't mean they didn't happen, but I did look. Okay, so it's a very analog, it's very Fordian if you're familiar with Charles Fort. His books in the early 20s and 30s. Supposedly this is all debunked. It was all a hoax. It's more complicated than that, as these things turned out to be. So there's this guy named Fred Chrisman. Chrisman's a notorious character. He was involved in several spooky 20th century events. Apparently, he was involved in JFK assassination. He's one of the tramps. They called it the 3 tramps, something like that. He's in a photo and things like that. This guy was counterintelligence. Fred Chrisman has also wrote a book about weird things happening in not Maury Island, but in Tacoma, Washington. He was a counterintelligence guy. He was also apparently involved in H-bomb testing and security and things like that. Okay, so in the story, and I call it a story because I don't believe we really understand what happened in the Maury Island incident. Some materials that fell were sent to publisher and editor Ray Palmer in Chicago. The story involves men in black, and the story involves Dahl fleeing in total panic. And Dahl actually did flee. I verified that in newspaper records. He went as far as he could go in a day's drive to Southern Oregon. Well, this incident's fascinating because the Washington State Senate officially covered it April 18th, 2017, really just years ago. Quote, the FBI's conclusions in Dahl's secret were sealed 50 years. Wait a second. That's an official Washington State Senate Resolution 8648. You can watch on YouTube where they passed it. It's a video. Why would they say that? Why would the documents be sealed 50 years if it's a hoax? That doesn't make any sense. So it turns out the Maury Island incident, men died. So we had, on August 2nd, 1947, 2 members of Army Air Force Intelligence, or Army Intelligence, I think. They died after their plane burst in flames. A few personnel were able to parachute out, but unfortunately, the 2 men who went to Maury Island or went to Tacoma to get these rocks, retrieve this debris, died. They were, in newspaper articles, they were quoted as extremely heavy, whatever debris they got, and they were heat exposed, and they were being analyzed at Chicago University. And they were analyzed, actually. And there's reports of that in UK press. Analysis of these materials are published in the BSRA and have links to all that. Okay, well, this is where it gets really interesting to me. First, there's the Washington State Senate resolution thing, where they found the FBI's conclusions in Dahl's secret for 50 years. That's interesting. So I went through the BSRA archive, and I just randomly ran into this. There's a letter to Maid Lane from a well-known at the time sci-fi author named Rob Phillips. You can find many of his early articles, or many of his sci-fi articles in the late 40s and 50s and stuff. Well, Rob Phillips wrote to Maid Lane about Mary Island. And now, Rob Phillips is tied to Ray Palmer. This is one of the only links I'm aware of, a man who's talking to people in both archives that I've got. This guy. I'm like, wow, what's going on? It's all about Mary Island. Now, and I have this letter here. You can read the whole thing. He wrote in pencil, top secret. This keep the secret. And that's weird. That's one of the few articles or a few letters in Maid Lane's archive where something like that happened. He wrote that the debris from the Mary Island craft was some kind of radioactive waste products from an atomic power plant. That he's claiming in his letter that the Mary Island craft were atomic powered and that they were ejecting radioactive blocks of metal. They were purified. And it just so happened by accident it fell on, Dolly's boat and stuff like that, and injured his child and killed the dog. Well, that's really interesting because there's another place that says that the Mary Island craft had some sort of atomic reactor. It's a Majestic document. So this letter was in August 1947. And by the way, nobody has seen it. This is from a private archive you can only see if you go to Sweden. You got to go there in person. I didn't get it scanned, or I didn't get the access to their file server until about 2 years ago. It says in a Majestic document, I'm not exactly sure when this Majestic document came out. It was
by the way, didn't somebody else get access shortly after, or did they get it before you?
I've heard someone else has access to the file server other than me. I don't know who they are, but you can also just go there in Sweden or email them, and they'll give you. They're not like hiding this. Here's the problem: is that the modern day BSRF, the foundation, has an agreement with the AFU people in Sweden, the archives you explain, where the AFU is not allowed to put the BSRA and the BSRA internal archive online so the public can see it. They have to go, which kind of sucks. They have to go to Sweden to read this stuff. So this was all, I want to emphasize, this was all scanned officially by the AFU people. I had nothing to do with the scanning of this. These guys are pros at this. They have been scanning stuff for literally decades, and they have a very large public download folder anybody can go to, and you can see their work. So they're well known for this kind of work. And by the way, the AFU people, they don't really respect this archive because it's like there's like cancer stuff. There's a lot of cancer research, alternative cancer research that the BSRA people were publishing in the 40s and 50s. And so they keep themselves at a distance from this archive. So they don't really put any time into it, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So you can read this letter. It's a fascinating letter. This is Roger Graham at the time. This is August 1947 when all this shit's going down. Just days, I think, after, like a couple weeks after or so, after these men die, he has a theory on what happened. This goes into a private archive. It isn't seen until really 2 years ago, until I got the archive, or if you were in AFU. Now, here's the deal. This is weird to me. Majestic document. I think this came out in the early 90s. Fifth annual report, supposedly 1952. This is the chronology I was referring to earlier on in my presentation. It says here in their chronology, the death of the two I'm quoting, the death of the two Air Force counterintelligence officers in the crash of the B-25 aircraft en route to Hamilton Air Force Base, California. After interviewing two auxiliary CG men, I think that is, or OG, who reported 6 UFOs over Mary Island, Washington in June 1947. CIC agent Chrisman, the CIC means Army Counterintelligence, had spoken to Kenneth Arnold, who on 26th of June 1947 had reported a flight of UFOs over Mount Rainier, Washington, and it filed his report after it spoken to blah, blah, blah. Okay.
It's probably Coast Guard, two auxiliary Coast Guard men.
Yeah, that might be Coast Guard men, yeah.
Yeah.
The material given to Davidson and Brown, those are the two gentlemen who passed away, was believed to come from Murray Island, and this is the key part, and may be celestial fragments containing metal from a nuclear reactor from a UFO. Fragments were turned over to CIA agent Shaw, and Chrisman was ordered to the Alaskan ADCS, Air Defense Command, I think, for assignment in Project Ivy. Project Ivy was the H-bomb project. That's period-specific terminology, by the way. So it's called Project Ivy back then. So I've been researching this whole section. This is fascinating me. Like, first of all, it says maybe celestial fragments containing metal from a nuclear reactor from a UFO. Well, we know let's say this is play a game here. Let's say this MJ-12 fifth annual report was real and was written in 52. Who could have told them that those fragments were from a nuclear reactor? BSRA could have. This information was sent to the BSRA, and we know the BSRA by 1950, at least, really 47, was communicating with the U.S. government. We're actually communicating with someone who's on the working group. So either somehow, if this is real, this MJ-12 fifth annual report, the U.S. government somehow had its own intelligence that it was fragments from a nuclear reactor from the UFO, or they got it from the BSRA. I don't really know. You could also say, oh, this fifth annual report is bogus, and somehow they guessed it right. They guessed the same thing that Ron Phillips guessed. But it gets more interesting. We have more corroboration. 4/28/1949, U.S. Air Force Director of Intelligence General Charles Cable reports of, quote, atomic-powered craft of unusual design, quote, unquote, forwarded to AEC, which is the Atomic Energy Commission. I have a link to it. You can read all about it here. This is a declassified document. And it's like, wait a second. This is not a majestic document as far as I can determine. This is a normal declassified document. What would be flying around in 1949 that was atomic-powered? A craft, nobody had it. No, we don't even.
Nothing. Yeah, well, today you might have them in satellites. That's probably the only.
But in 49, and also it was for the AEC. Now, why is that significant? Because Colonel Nell recently at the Seoul Foundation conference said, hey, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 covers UAPs. And by the way, UAPDA refers to the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. So there's an atomic connection here. And it pops up in officially declassified documents. Why would atomic-powered craft be popping up in the late 40s and early 50s? It's really interesting. And so here's my opinion on the Mariana incident. I think we're all been misled. I think there's some invented terminology here. My opinion is this. Something big happened in June 1947. It involved debris. The IPU, that would be the Interplanetary Phenomena Unit, which was started around 41, 42, would have kicked in. They would have contained the situation. They sent in Chrisman. There was their man on the street. Chrisman was nearby in Tacoma. That's where Dahl lived. Chrisman would be the guy you send in. Chrisman was CIC, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, which was supposedly involved in these kind of matters during World War II. Was part of Army G2. Some say was part of CIC. So they sent in their man Chrisman. Now, Fred Chrisman was a counterintelligence man, a military man. He was not a logger. Okay, he wasn't in that. You look through Fred Chrisman wrote a book. You look at his biography. That guy was not a logger. Why would he be the boss of Dahl? It makes no sense. So my opinion is, my thesis is that Chrisman was inserted in by the U.S. government to run interference, and Chrisman sat down with Dahl, which is part of the official lore. Men in black guys started following him and say, hey, I'm not following him, but talking to him. And they're like, hey, read him the Riot Act and said, you are going to do what I say. And that's the end of it, or else. And so we threatened Dahl, and Kenneth Arnold flew in and started interacting with Dahl and I think Chrisman. And there was all kinds of weird phone tapping going on. The U.S. government was really, really interested in this shit and wanted to cover it up. And they successfully did. So if you read the official Project Sun report for Montreal, it's like, it was a hoax. It's more complicated than that because we have officially declassified documents talking about atomic-powered craft of unusual design flying around. So anyway, here's my conclusion for my presentation here. I think UAPs might not be real. Like I've seen one thing which might have been a UAP. It was a triangle, but it might have been ours, right? I don't know. I don't have the real firm proof. But we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that there's something going on. But independent of that, the more we poke around the UAP situation, the more information we're finding that our history has still, part of it's still classified. It was not declassified. I'm pretty sure radar is one of those technologies which we just don't really have a great picture of yet. We're still, I think in the 21st century, we're gonna peel away the layers of World War II history still and figure out, wow, all these weird things happened at World War II. That's what David Grush is basically saying. If you listen to the guy, we're living in a state of mass amnesia. So apparently we were overflown 1947. During World War II, according to Grush and reports that we have in our chronologies, our nuclear program was interfered with. Plutonium production was shut down several times. We had craft flying over, Manhattan Project sites. Something was happening. It was big. ufology, just a little thing here I want to put this, demise has been greatly exaggerated. Like, ufology to me is just researching history at this point. Like, there's history here that we still can figure out. And all these new newspaper data archives, like, they're being unstoppably digitized now. We can now do things. Here's the deal: a high school student with a freaking Chromebook can click a button and access a billion newspaper articles now. At the click of a button. We didn't have that in the 20th century. So I'm using AI now, but only in a simple way: translation, summarization. But even just that, like just being able to give AI a piece of handwritten, cursive writing, and say, I want you to convert that to text and fix any errors. It's amazing. It really accelerates the work. We're able to compose custom tools and apps. And I was thinking, well, what would Frank Scully say about the situation? What happened? And I'm pretty sure he would have said that it was divine intervention. And so here's my special thanks. And in here, I definitely want to thank the researchers at the AFU and the American Heritage Center for sure. And there's several other people I definitely like to thank here. Actually, the AFU founder. Without these people, like especially these archives, it just wouldn't be possible. So that's it. That's my main presentation, Sean. I do have some bonus slides. I don't know how much time we got.
Oh, just keep going. I think we're fine. Yeah, just keep going. Like we can go as long as you need. I think.
I'll throw in the bonus slides. I've never covered this anywhere before. So while going through the archives, I've been doing deep searches for any period-specific phrase, and I've been sorting results chronologically and just looking at them. It turns out, were UAPs or flying saucers discussed during the summer of 1947 flat? The answer is yes, once. July 9th, the day after Roswell, Senator Taylor, I can't figure out if it's Glenn H. or Dean P., said, quote, Mr. President, the so-called flying discs or saucers, which have been so extensively reported during the past fortnight, could serve as a warning of what is in store for the peoples, not only of our own nation, but of every country on this little globe we call Earth. If these contrivances, flying at the terrific speeds which have been reported, are proven a reality, they will simply demonstrate once again how small this world has become, how open it is to attack by as yet unknown and undemonstrated weapons, unquote. This is in the congressional record. It's part of the record. And anybody can go click. I have a link to it. You can go look at it yourself. So that is significant. I think that's historical. That's the day after Roswell. Okay, let's fast forward to the Korean War, 1951. Another flying disc hit in the congressional record. This is interesting. You have to look at the context, which I don't really do a great job on this slide showing you the full context. So the context is this. There's the 82nd Congress in the Senate, Mr. Mahoney, the Democrat. He was talking about research and development programs in the USSR, and he also mentions he's unhappy that TASS, which is a news agency of the Soviet Union, was outside, fishing around, covering the events. He said this. He talks about R&D, and he says, quote, what I have just picked up is almost a flying disc. It is a new carrier for gasoline. It is made of synthetic rubber. It carries about 5 gallons of gasoline and is now in use. Wait a second. There were no flying discs. That's all. The U.S. Air Force said they don't exist. Menzel said they don't exist. Other debunkers said, oh, no, that's just spots in front of your eyes. Why is a guy in the Senate talking about flying discs in the context of high technology R&D projects, basically threatening the Soviet Union? You could read it. You could go click on it and read it yourself. So I find that, to me, that appears to be, if this is real, and it seems to be, he's threatening the Soviets. The Soviets surely, according to my research, the Soviets didn't figure out until the mid-'60s that we had something going on. I don't know how true it is. Maybe it was his top secret. Maybe the Soviets did know by 51 that we had something. I don't know. Okay, now I want to give a warning out to other readers and researchers. So in my research, I've been collecting a lot of books and I've been researching things. So and digitally and physical books. And I've learned something very important. I was going through Frank Scully's archive and I found, and I did mention this earlier, I found an advertisement for this specific book from 1952. And in this book, it says, hey, there were censored dailies. I'm like, wait a second. What was censored? Hold on. Dailies it's a newspaper terminology from the early 20th century. Like, what do you mean there were censored dailies in July 47? Well, I bought the book. I bought the Kindle book, Coming of the Saucers by Kenneth Arnold. The Kindle book does not have the word dailies anywhere. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So then I go buy another book, another reprinted. Didn't have the word dailies. I'm like, something's not right. So I actually bought an original printing of this book. It cost me over $100. I got it shipped here. I got to go to the post office to pick it up. The post office is like, what the hell are you getting? What is this shit? And so it's the original printing of the book. It's only in the original printing that those censored photos, which I showed at the beginning, are in the book, and information about the censored dailies and all that stuff. So the CIC went. We have by the way, this definitely provably happened. CIC and or FBI went and pulled the dailies so it couldn't be published in the nation's archives. So I reason I have this slide here is I'm warning everybody out there that Kindle cannot be trusted. There's a variety of reasons why. Not just, I'm not saying it's a cover-up. What I'm basically saying in this situation is it's untrustworthy. It's OCR. OCR is not reliable software. It makes mistakes. There's no errors in OCR. Additionally, the family took over this book. They removed Ray Palmer. Ray Palmer's information was crucial. And they basically thought it was UFOs. They changed the cover. The cover was important. The cover doesn't show a saucer. It shows a crescent-shaped craft. That's what Kenneth Arnold wanted on the cover. That's what he illustrates the U.S. government. So the family took it over. I'm not saying the family did anything nefarious. I think they just thought it was like ghosts and stuff. And they're like, they just went, edited the book, and they threw in family photos and got rid of the key information. Most important information. What were you going to say, Sean?
Well, I think the intelligence community has a term for this. I think it's called persistent media or something like that. It's media that once it's out there, it's out there forever. And what the development of ebooks has done is it's given folks who want to censor things a new lease on life, because you have the whole dynamic that was predicted in 1984, right? Oceania was never at war with East Asia. We've always been at war with whatever the other country was in that book. So that kind of gives them a new lease on life. So when you buy something when it first comes out, always buy a hard copy.
Yes.
Because you never know.
That's what the author wanted.
The same thing's happening in movies too, right? Like if you edit this stuff streaming, right? They can change it at any time and change history. It's scary stuff.
Yep. Like Star Wars. Star Wars has been edited, which pisses me off. So there's another reason. Yeah, Kindle books, I only buy Kindle books for fiction stuff that I don't really care about. For research purposes, you really need to get the original printing if you can. And because that's what the author wanted to get out there. And there are instances in history.
Even fiction. They're doing it to Dr. Seuss, for goodness sake.
It's crazy.
It's insane. It's insane. Anyway, keep continuing.
Yeah. So there are other books in UAP history. Ruppelt, one of Ruppelt's books, he was a Blue Book guy. The first version of his book came out, and then he was pressured to issue a second version where he removed key information. So the different versions of the books are important. I assume the physical printing is going to be looked at by the author and inspected. There's a lot of sloppy Kindle books out there. Also, Kindle books can lose photos and they can lose charts and graphs too. So, this is by the way, I mentioned this earlier. This is the advertisement from Frank Scully's archive. And I read this, and I'm like, this is from Ray Palmer and Kenneth Arnold. It's sent to all these people. They're like, hey, we got this book coming out, private printing. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. And it has censored information. This is from the advertisement. And I saw this photo of the upper left. I'm like, wait a second, that was censored? Get the hell out of here, right? And there's other photos. I don't know about these things, but there's some formation photos and some wacky. I don't know about that. But this on the upper left was censored. I'm going to be honest, some people say that there's an orb in this photo, and I must emphasize that this is an analog photography chemical process. Who knows what kind of noise would be in that photo, right? I normally discard all photos and ignore them, but I only look at this one because it was censored, and the U.S. government, for sure, provably, did not want the nation to see that photo. They wanted that taken off. And by the way, according to the witness, William A. Rhodes, this flew low. And I think actually it might have made noise. So it's not all, UAPs are not always silent. Sometimes they make noise. And it's a minor miracle this guy was able to take this photo. It was a Brownie camera, some really ancient camera thing. And this was analyzed to death by Project Sign personnel. So it's some big figures. And they thought this photo was very important. This is
right, Rich. Yeah. Rich, something's out there has a totally legit question. So
Yeah.
What does Rich mean in conclusion? Quote, UAPs may not be real. But then he
Well,
says, quote unquote, we were overflown. Sorry.
something. Listen. I don't. In terms of evidence, we have reams and reams and reams of evidence that something happened over the United States. Summer '47.
There was a phenomenon in the sky where there were overflights of something.
Yes. It was
Right.
seen on radar. It was spotted simultaneously by radar personnel, using binoculars, by men in planes. We have reports that were simultaneous reports. We have high quality reports from police, from intelligence, military folks. There was a phenomenon spotted. But I don't. It's just circumstantial evidence. We don't have a ground gurney. We don't have a UAP out in front. So I'm saying, like, I'm trying to be scientific here. I'm trying to, like, say, okay, I have my own personal opinion. I think the odds that this is a real phenomenon are extraordinarily high. It's not
Right.
1.0, but it's not zero. I would claim this.
I think you would need extraordinary proof to prove that there's nothing to see here. I think
there's something to it. Yeah, they're censoring things.
Right.
If they're censoring things, there's something here to it. Whatever it is, right? There's something. Like, why would they censor it? They sent counterintelligence personnel to go get these photos, so something happened. Whatever.
Well, especially back in the 1950s. Like today, maybe we've progressed to a point where we have some extremely high-tech, technology that we don't want our adversaries to see. But back in the 50s, there's no way we had things with these sorts of capabilities. They're just
I look at it this way. Out of 55,000 entries in this database I have, and there are redundant entries in this database, so I only really have about 30,000 events. That's okay, because there's another database out there, the UPDB database. It's a rogue database. He has 350,000 of them reports. I think personally, the odds that all of them are real UAP sightings are probably zero. The odds that all of them are fake or hoaxes are probably zero. I think it's somewhere in the middle. There was a lot of people who saw amazing things and reported them to the U.S. government and other agents, other organizations. A lot of these reports are from expert military aviators. These were people trained to spot Soviet craft, Chinese craft, our craft, atmospheric phenomena, things like that. And also, like, it's awfully weird. You get a lot of reports of gyro compasses misbehaving, going wild. Like, it goes on and on. By the way, in the 60s and 70s, you get a lot of reports of TVs showing lots of static. By the way, that Pascagoula encounter that you mentioned earlier, or the abduction event, there's also reports in the chronology of TVs went wild at the same time in that area too. So, like, if you look at a chronology, they call it chron in intelligence terminology. You sort it by date, and you look at it, and you'll see, like, oh, wait a second. TVs, people reported in the area that TVs got a lot of static. And then there were other witnesses to that Pascagoula, I think, early 70s abduction. There were other witnesses to the craft as well. But I sometimes hedge my word. I hedge if UAPs are real. I think that's fair, though. Like, if they're not real, then there's still a phenomenon, whatever that is, that needs to be explained. Okay, this is really interesting to me. I've covered this bit on Twitter. So there are the researchers out there, other historians, who say, this didn't start until the 40s. That's not true. I don't think that's true. There are witnesses there's at least one witness anyway, who came out in summer 47. His name is John Caldwell. He claimed that he saw UAPs in 1890 and 1947. He went to a newspaper, a local one, the Austin Statesman. He brought his 1890 clipping with him to the newspaper, and then this article came out. You can read the article. I have a link to it. He said that there was a multiple witness sighting in the 1890. He saw UAPs then. He saw them in July 1947, and he's like, "Whoa, these were the same things." And he went to this is like a Rosetta Stone, because now we have a witness who goes to newspapers and says, "I saw the same thing in the 1890s." And if you go through the 1896, 1897 reports, a lot of them sound like UAP reports. I'm sure there were many hoaxes too, right? But as some say, but there's over 1,000 of them. There's other researchers who compile them, and they're really compelling. There's also MIB reports, crash retrieval, at least one crash retrieval, cattle abduction, mutilation reports. Like, really, it's like different terminology, but the same phenomenon. This I find interesting too. In the 1897, April 29th, 1897, Kansas City Gazette, Edison's quoted. He's a famous inventor. he said, I don't think these mystery airship sightings are real. However, I think we could make a plane. He predicted airships, quote, will not be on the balloon idea. They will be made of very light material, raised by means of a powerful motor. Well, Edison nailed it because that was only a few years for Edison Brothers' first flight. I find that fascinating. So here we have Edison Brothers' first flight occurs a few years later. Thomas Edison, famous inventor, was aware of the airship reports, and he was inspired to figure out, like, how would we make an airplane? And it appeared in newspapers. So there's some interaction going on here between the phenomena, whatever it is, because it's not simple.
Mm-hmm.
Going through the database, the reason why I hedge myself so much, it's an extremely complex phenomenon. They're not all physical objects. So Soviet experts published in the early 90s that they classified the phenomena as plasmoid and technological. They put it in two different categories. So it appears that the phenomena is not always just physical objects. It could also appear to be non-physical as well. It's extremely complicated. There's no one explanation that fits.
And it often appears to be something that's just on the edge of our technological capability.
Yeah.
So back then it was
tracking.
like airships, right?
And
before we could actually fly. And then
exactly.
Yeah.
It was called.
And then now it's like interstellar kind of anti-gravitic sort of craft.
Yeah, so they called it cultural tracking. Other researchers in the 20th century, it seems to track whatever culture, whatever we think is high tech at the time. So in 1896, it was some kind of mysterious airship with super powerful lights. And maybe, in the early 1900s, we do get, it's interesting, after Wright brothers' flight, there's something interesting that emerges in the data sets. We get a wave of reports of mysterious, unidentified aircraft flying at night, which there's a period of time. I'm not an aviation expert, but I have researched this a bit. There's a period of time after Wright brothers for about 2 decades or so, where night flying was extraordinarily dangerous, basically suicidal. Yet in these chronologies, we have tons of reports of weird aircraft flying at night with lights too, really bright lights or multicolored lights. And at the time, they were reported in the newspapers as unidentified aircraft. People would see these things and go, well, it's an aircraft, right? But sometimes they were reported to hover. Now, this is in many newspaper articles of the era, the time period between, say, World War I and Wright brothers' flight. These things would hover over air bases and over cities. And it's like, wait a second, airplanes can't hover. And, we didn't have helicopters back then. So what's going on? It's really strange. Okay. I covered the BSRA a bit. I did make a donation to BSRA to gain access to their file server. They were very nice of them to do that. That's how I gained access to this stuff. I would have had to flow to Sweden to do that. And then a little thing here. BSRA had a lot of people informing them. And so in 49, they talked about crash retrievals quite a bit. So just, I have a Medium posting. I've deeply researched all the leaks, all the rumors that have occurred about crash retrievals. The story really starts emerging in 49. So I don't think if Roswell happened, which I think it did, I think there was crashes, I think we retrieved them. They could not keep it secret. There were leaks. It was impossible to keep it secret. So what intelligence, in my opinion, did is they figured, well, let's let the leaks happen and then debunk the leaks. That's what happened with Frank Scully. The leaks happened. U.S. got all excited. It's very interesting. If you read Frank Scully's book on crash retrievals, around 1/3 of the book is a science lesson. What was a big deal back then? We were competing against the Soviet Union. There was a shortage of scientists. So it was kind of like, hey, there's crash retrievals, and by the way, here's a science lesson on electromagnetism. So I find it really interesting. And there was rumors in the late 40s that they were going to acclimate the public over a period of many decades about the crash retrieval and the UFO situation. These rumors, by the way, emerged through multiple channels too, newspapers, magazines, and books. This is the second page of Gerald Light's document here. Not that interesting, but I figured it's not well known, so I put it out there. It does mention Oppenheimer and stuff like that. Okay, this is another whistleblower from the Careers Disclosure Project. This guy's name is Bill Uhas. I found this. I posted on Twitter. There's a picture of him with a general. I researched Bill Uhas's ancestry profile. I was able to find his father's name, his mother's name. I plugged that into search engines, and I found, wait a second, this guy was in the Marine Corps, and at the right time as well. And he claimed to have worked on a UAP crash simulator. I could not find no evidence of that, but another whistleblower I covered earlier, Don Phillips, did vouch for him. And he appears on video talking about the apparently he interacted with an AHI. I don't know if that really happened or not, but he was in the Marine Corps for sure. And he was a good guy. He was in the Korean War. Okay. I've released a search engine for this chronology. You can go to it. I recommend Firefox desktop, but other browsers do work. UFO-search.com. It runs entirely in your browser. No information is ever sent back to me about what you're searching for. So you can search wherever you want. And it's unlike other search engines for UAPs. I never can see and never want to see what you're searching for. And the NSA never sees it either. So it runs in your browser, which is a different technology what other people do. Other people run a server in some farm somewhere, and they can in the cloud usually.
Would it be possible to use ChatGPT to interrogate this? In other words, to write a prompt in ChatGPT to
ask a good question.
Research to this. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can access the web from ChatGPT. I know you can in the professional version, but you have to it's like $50 basically because you have to have 2 seats in order to do that.
Yeah.
So
what ChatGPT actually is quite useful for UAP research. So it's very aware of all the major incidents, and you could coax it to talk about it. I've actually had quite a bit of luck with it. Other engines aren't maybe not as good. So yeah, I also translated with AI. It's very good at translating, just between one language and another. I translated this book. This is a key book. It came out, I think it was 91. It's written by a famous woman named Dr. Marina Popovich. She was a famous Soviet test pilot, extremely well decorated. She trained to be a cosmonaut. Her husband was famous too. I think he was a cosmonaut as well. He didn't want her to go to space. She was connected at all hell. She wrote a book. The book really it's in German. It's not in Russian. She wanted it purposely released in Germany. As the Soviet Union was collapsing around her and her friends, they decided they had a window of opportunity to get UFO information out. So she contacted all her friends and all the UFO people in the Soviet Union, whatever, authors, scientists, and shit. She got as much information as she could in this book. Unfortunately, nobody ever translated it, which just blew my mind. So I'm like, wait a second, I got to know what's in this book. So I bet
you somebody translated it.
Never open source. They never released it. Yeah, it's possible they didn't. I don't know. Anyway, I translated this book. It's unbelievable. First of all, like every other page, it's mentioning orbs, based on what we used to call Foo Fighters. Orbs are a big deal now. Apparently, orbs have been spotted, and a lot of old historical photos, which people thought were fakes. If you look close, you'll see a lot of orbs, sometimes in formation. There's many orb sightings reported in the 50s and 60s, even up to today. There's many orb videos. Well, anyway, the Soviets were spotting these things too. It turns out the Soviets were just behind us, which doesn't surprise me, on the phenomena. In the 40s, the Soviets thought it was just a capitalist hoax, apparently. But the Soviets started spotting UAPs on radar in 1947, according to Felix Ziegel. He published several articles where this was stated. By the way, the CIA translated Dr. Felix Ziegel's articles in the late 60s. We have those translations. So the CIA knew what Ziegel knew. Also, Soviet experts were starting to collaborate for a short period of time with the Condon Report experts. So for a short period of time, there was some communication going on. The Soviets investigated UAP landing sites. They found extremely strong temporal anomalies. They brought in naval chronometers, mechanical watches, and quartz crystal oscillator watches. They found, I don't recall if it was time slowed down or sped up, but time in these landing sites, they apparently had a lot of landings, sped up or slowed down. I think it was actually both, but it leaned one way or the other. And they noted it. They had scientific reports about this. Many Soviet pilots were injured. They had a lot of eye injuries and other injuries reported in UAP encounters. That's in her book. They also claimed this was around Roswell. So Roswell emerged a lot in the late 80s and early 90s, and then we had Lieutenant Colonel Corso's book and stuff. So we had Roswell. Well, the Soviets claimed they had fragments. They had multiple retrievals. They also claimed to have found the craft, I think it was beneath a house, and all these weird things were occurring in the area, and they finally figured out there actually was like a craft down there. It's in the
like
book.
Poltergeist activity?
Yeah,
basically?
Poltergeist activity and other strange paranormal activity was occurring in the area above the craft. So that's really, and this is, by the way, this came out in 91. Now, Dr. Popovich was
kind of like Skinwalker Ranch, maybe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like similar kind of events. Weirdness, high strangeness. People were getting hurt, by the way, too. They claim. So Dr. Popovich did a bit of a media tour, 91, 92, like that time frame. She was followed around by 2 KGB guys at all times. It's the newspaper articles. So they were monitoring what she was saying. Many books, by the way, if you go through other archives, which I haven't really gone through yet, there's a ex-NASA guy who was really deep into UAPs. Can't remember his name off the top of my head. But he has his archives at the University of Wyoming, right next to Frank's, actually, Frank Scully's. There's a ton of Soviet books in there. So the Soviets were getting their books out right as the Soviet Union was collapsing. Nobody has translated these books. So I'm starting to translate them. It's a lot of work, though. OpenAI can do it mostly reliably. You really have to feed it 2 or 3 pages at a time so the translations in between pages are accurate. So I laboriously translated this all on archive.org. You can easily find it with Google. You can read the book yourself. So it also covers other things like Abominable Snowman. They had expeditions, stuff like that.
Yetis,
they covered Yetis and things like that. But UAPs, most of the book is about UAPs. Just so you know, UAPs were absolutely a phenomenon in the Soviet Union. Multiple experts were debating the problem, but the Soviet Union secretly started to research the issue in the late 70s. It was classified. There are new books that have come out just in the last few years you can get on Kindle from ex-Soviet researchers now in Ukraine who are they're not part of Russia. They're talking about the situation. So there's a lag time with UAPs. Everything is freaking secret. Chinese keep it secret. Russians do, Soviets do. We do. So there's a 25, 50, 75-year lag time. We're just starting to learn things that happened like decades ago. Here's what I did. I bought all the crash retrieval conference proceedings. So in the early 2000s, between 2003 and 2009, the Woods, Dr. Wood and his son, who've compiled the Majestic documents, Dr. Wood worked for one of the major aerospace companies. They had these crash retrieval conferences in Las Vegas. They published proceedings. Unfortunately, they're really hard to get. So I've compiled them all. I got them all. I scanned them all in with a medical scanner. It's like 1,000 pages of stuff. And I have a website up, and I put them all on archive.org. And it's extremely valuable information up there you can read about. It's like all this amazing research from all these authors, some of them well-known today. Some of them I think you've actually interviewed up on there. And by the way, this is just so people get a picture for what was happening. While these UAPs are flying over, we're nuclear testing. A lot of it's open air. This is the Castle Bravo disaster. So I put this up here. Lunar Valley, I covered this earlier. I found this really interesting. I don't know how true this is, but in Lunar Valley, the sci-fi article from 46, it said that American agents were using helicopters in the late 30s on secret, missions and stuff like that. It might be plausible. I haven't researched. I'm not an aviation guy, deep one, so I don't know how true this is. But I think metaphorically speaking, that makes sense. What metaphorically Ray Palmer or whoever wrote this was saying was the U.S. military has secret stuff that's years or decades ahead of what's in public, and we all know that's true today. Of course, they have secret things, secret aircraft, things like that. Yeah. So more quick index stuff. Yeah. So if you search for telepathic, this is interesting. If you search for the word telepathic or telepathy and a chronology of UAP reports, and these aren't just sightings, these are also encounters, landings, abductions, etc. Dan, it shows up a lot all over the world too. People claim that they get these messages delivered in their heads. They call it telepathy. It happens over and over and over and over again. So apparently, there's some sort of technology which enables, this to happen, and it's being reported. Whatever the phenomenon is extraordinarily telepathic, according to the witnesses. Okay, so I started to compile. This is like I think the last time I got one of them. I've compiled a list of leaks about Edwards Air Force Base and the claims around it. Dude, it's enormous. I could write a whole book about this. It spirals into the Vatican, SIV. Apparently, the Vatican set up an intelligence agency after the events of Edwards Air Force Base. One of the witnesses, the supposed witnesses, was Bishop McIntyre. After whatever went down, he was one of the witnesses to it at Edwards Air Force Base. He flew to the Vatican. American intelligence, according to the lore, tried to stop him. He refused. He went to the Vatican, told the Vatican this stuff. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. I got dozens of these things, right? So something happened. By the way, some of these leaks come from military people. We have Naval Commander Charles L. Suggs. His son and him said that something happened at Edwards Air Force Base. This was a Canadian commander. I verified for sure he was a commander. Yeah, it just goes on and on and on. I have some note. These are notes from Scully here. This is the 1954 situation. Like, he has endless, not endless, but many notes about that. Okay, the May 20th, 1954, in Scully's notes, they pulverized 30 diamond drill bits without any effect whatsoever. Scully never published that. They were trying to get into a craft, apparently. Now, Likotsky, a modern figure who wrote a book recently that was Doppler cleared, he said that they had gained entrance in this Doppler cleared book to a craft. Well, congratulations for now back in 1954. They tried with diamond drill bits. I don't know how they gained access to it, but they did. And so, by the way, this is just a snapshot. The BSRA archive has all these folders in it. These are the folders that I was given access to. This is a snapshot of it. And this is a picture here of I put a little search engine up. This is technology that Frank Scully and the 50s would have found amazing. So Frank Scully, he had typewritten note cards, right? And like that's all he had. There's no searching that. You'd have to sit there and look at each one, by hand. Which now we just click a button and we can just search thousands of them. So this is the chronology here. So yeah, that's basically the end of my presentation. Thanks for. Yeah, I'm not making any money out of this. This is costing me money. It's certainly not helping me with software. Like, I could be working and making money from writing open source software, But I find this. Listen, if what Grush is saying, Colonel Nell, what's in the UAPDA is true, all of history that we know it's got to be re-examined. It has to, everything, like going back 100, maybe 100, 200, maybe thousands of years.
Could you imagine being like an historian at like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford, and everything that you've learned and studied your entire life, you have fragments of it, but you're missing the greater context. Yeah. And, they're not necessarily wrong. Like, they're just taking information that was put out there, but a lot of this information was seeded with deliberate misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, and some of it was just to make sure the Soviets didn't catch up and figure out what we were doing, which I understand. I get it, right? I wouldn't want the Soviets to figure this shit out before we, I get it. I have a lot of U.S. military people in my background, so I understand they would have agreed. I know they would have agreed to keep the core of the secret. I'm sure. My grandfather was at Pearl Harbor. I have a picture of him right there. That's a ship, USS California. However, I'm confident that if we were at risk for another Pearl Harbor, and Chris Mellon has said this publicly, that we are, because we're mishandling the UAP situation. We're overclassifying UAPs. So the men on the people in the radar installations at the air bases, they don't know. They're not being told the UAPs are real. They're not being told that there are weird drones flying around that are not from China. They don't know. They have no idea. It's like Pearl Harbor all over again. It could happen again. If this phenomenon comes back, and it comes back in, at least historically speaking, it comes in waves, very large, enormous spikes. If it comes back, we're going to be caught with our pants down. So we can't let that happen. That's why the UAPDA, in my opinion, has to pass. We need to release. Listen, here's the reality. Okay, if you read the Soviet literature and the Chinese experts or astronomers, and you read what the newspaper articles and other reports from them, everybody knows that this shit's real. The Chinese know. The Chinese government knows. They have their own stuff. The Russians have had their own crashes. They have their own fragments. The Chinese, the Russian experts, many of them have published about it and talked about it. There's more coming out every day. Soviet experts now in Ukraine are talking about it. It's a situation. And Dr. Eric W. Davis, who's well known in this field, he's a propulsion expert. He's talked a lot about it. In New York Times, he's been quoted, things like that. He did a classified presentation to the Senate. I think it was in like late 2019 and 2020. He said that, and I have the quotes from all over on my Medium. So he said that the Chinese, the Russians, and us all have debris. So this is not a secret anymore. Everybody has their stuff. So why are we hiding this from the American people? But they're not going to panic because they don't believe it anyway. Like, here's the reality. Unfortunately,
so Terrence will Willis, I think, or Terrence Wills basically answered your question.
Yeah, exactly. We've been lied to.
These people are like, some fraction of the population is going to want to tear these people apart, and I'm sympathetic. I'm a little. I can understand why they would feel that way.
I know why they kept it secret originally, because after war, originally 40s and 50s, because we were on razor's edge after World War II. Nukes just nukes just came out, right? They're
I get it, and that explains everything up until the end of the Cold War in 1991.
Yeah, exactly.
After that, there are no excuses.
It is now a major security risk keeping the core information. Like that UAPs are real. There apparently are drones that fly over. They appear like metallic orbs and things like that. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, right now, I watch media carefully. I watch alt media, major media, legacy media, whatever. I watch Twitter, social media. Most of the American public hasn't figured out what's happening right now. Is that, UAPDA, actually a very weak, watered down version has already passed. They're trying to pass another UAPDA. I was at the Seoul conference. I watched Dr. Gary Nolan right there in person talk about he has material. He has a security clearance. It has weird isotopes in it. These isotopes would cost many, many millions, maybe tens or hundreds of millions of dollars if they could even be manufactured by our technology. These isotopes, by the way, were found at UAP event sites. They were dropped by UAP or appeared, there, whatever. Something is up. There's no doubt in my mind something's going on. I mean, we're getting legislation.
Something's coming too.
Something's coming as well.
2026.
Well, I mean, at the minimum, I hope legislation's coming. I don't know if UAPs are coming, but I would say, given the past, we could look at what happened in the past, and it seems to be we start setting off nukes, weird shit happens. We start making plutonium back in World War II. Weird shit happens over we have many reports over sensitive installations. That weird things are appearing over these installations. We have reports that plutonium production had to get shut down, at least on a few of these things. Like, to ignore the situation is insanity, and just, to me, it's insane. Like, whatever the phenomenon actually is. So there's figures out there with security clearances. I'm not going to name their names, but we talk about it on Twitter all the time. Like, they're just waving their hands and doing a shuck and jive and trying to say, "Oh, this is real. You're all cultists." Well, hold on. Something is happening, and it's U.S. military people, intelligence experts, expert pilots, radar operators. It goes back many decades. And what's shocking to me, the reports continue to this day. We have overflights over Langley Air Force Base. This is all over Twitter. This is not secret. I have access to no classified information. I've never worked on UAPs or anything I've ever worked on in my entire life. It's just a hobby. But I'm telling you what's on Twitter right now. Langley Air Force Base has been overflown as recently as last year, and it was in a public media news report. Yeah, and they had to relocate their fighters, and these aren't Chinese drones, by the way, because we can watch videos from Ukraine war of Russians shooting down drones. Like, that came out a few days ago. So it's like, hold on now. China is not sending drones over the United States like that, and if they do, these are acts of war. These are acts of war. Like, we shot down their balloon, right? Like, these are acts of war now. Like, sending drones over an airbase and then fighters having to be relocated. If we are that close to war with China, man, that's some heavy shit. And
what are your thoughts on Lou Elizondo's imminent book?
Oh, I look forward to it. I have it on the way.
Imminent, as in it's coming out imminently, and also.
First of all, its DOPS are cleared, and he, from what I understand, he has made it clear where DOPSR said you're not allowed to talk about that. So DOPSR is the defense. I don't know the acronym. It's like Defense Publication Agency, right? Where anybody who's worked and had security clearances and wants to write a book, they got to get it cleared to make sure there's no classified information in there. The bad guys get their hands on, right? Tell a friend, tell an enemy, as Semiman says. So Elizondo has very wisely blanked out those sections that DOPSR said you can't read.
Oh, so they're in the book. Last I
heard that I could be wrong, but it's the last I heard on Twitter a few months ago, those sections are still in there. So yeah, I look greatly forward to it. Listen, Lou Elizondo, in my opinion, he's an American hero.
You can use AI to infer what those things are.
Yeah, right? But it's just going to be a guess. It's just going to be a probabilistic inference based off predicting next words. Yeah, and sometimes that might actually work great, but a big
Yeah,
section, yeah. So anyway, I think my personal opinion is Lou Elizondo is an American hero. I hope he gets a medal one day from the president. I'm serious, he should be. He's put his life at risk. He's been threatened many times. Yeah, and there's David Grush as well. He's an American hero. He's been threatened many times. It's very serious with him.
Look, I just interviewed Jason Sands, and I had to bleep out certain locations because Arrow is going after people.
Yeah, and so we talk about this on Twitter all the time. I think the guys who work at Arrow are doing their best, right? But they're in a terrible situation where they're told by the brass, make this go away. And so what do? Here's what they do, in my opinion. They throw out reports with totally bogus dates that a high school student can get off Wikipedia. They don't put June 24th, 1947 as kind of on Sunday, which anybody that's read any book basically about UFOs or saucers would know is 24th. They put, I think it was 20 from memory. I think it was 25th or something 26th, whatever. Put in there, it's wrong date. It's just how do you screw up? It's on Wikipedia, bro. I know they let you use Wikipedia, right? In the Department of Defense. So yeah, I'm gonna be careful what I say about the former head of Arrow. But in my opinion, he's doing his job too. The man in a bad situation. And there's been articles that have come out which look like they've been influenced by him. And he's basically said that, he's in a shitty spot. And in my opinion, he's going to do a Heineck one day. And he's going to come out with a book and a huge book tour like Elizondo. And he's going to say, here's the real story about UAPs. I'm sorry. No, I had to say it was all a bug. Here's the real story. And it's just going to be another layer of the security onion. So it's very common in classified work. You read all about this in various books. They'll have different layers that the Soviets or the counterintelligence have to drill through. And so what we're doing is, here's the problem that the former head of Arrow has, is that U.S. public thinks this is all disinformation because they see Grush, Colonel Mel, Chris Mellon. The government,
and they're only revealing part of the story too.
Yeah,
they're not.
U.S. government has a horrible credibility problem. Nobody trusts them anymore. I mean, they've lied too much. It's all this. They had a disinformation board. A disinformation governance board was always big controversy a year or two ago. The U.S. government, it turns out, had tried. This came out on Twitter too. Spread disinformation about foreign vaccines recently. Don't take. It's this is. They have bad credibility, so nobody's
careful of that word.
Oh, I said the V word. Well, anyway,
don't say it anymore.
I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna be rated by YouTube censors now. But anyway, it's true. It was a news report, by the way.
I mean, there's a reason why my Twitter viewership is at least on this is 10x what it is on YouTube right now.
I said the V word. Well, what I'm trying to say is this.
Yeah.
My point is this: is that in the alt media, UAPs are laughed at. They think it's a freaking psyop. Now, so what that means is the only people really listening to Arrow and the former Arrow director are people like me, right? And other enthusiasts on UFO Twitter. And we know the situation. We know about Blue Book. We know it went down. We know it was bullshit. We know that the best cases were sent to CIA and other intelligence agencies. That's all public. It's all declassified documents. It's official documents. So who are you trying to fool? You ain't fooling us. So what actually is happening is that they're running these interference ops, these counterintelligence ops, and all of us just sit there and tweet endlessly pictures of the former Arrow director vomiting, or no, on a horse vomiting and shit like that. We all know. And so they're causing it to be worse. So if they are trying to contain it, and they are, they're making the situation worse. So
you should see my Jason Sands, interview. It comes out. The first one comes out September 9th. The first, because I had to go back and I had to bleep out locations that he was saying that everybody knows. Everybody knows these locations publicly.
I think I can say this. I don't think there's any problem. I don't think Jason have any problems with me saying this. So Sean texted me. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to interview Jason Sands." I'm like, "I don't know who this guy is." Good luck. And Sean's like, "Hey, can you just check him out?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure." I spent a few hours poking around the databases. All public information. Any high school student can do it with $20 a month subscription income. I went on Ancestry.com, plugged his name in. Oh, there's his middle name. There's where he lived. Okay, fine. Plug that into Google. Oh, shit. this man was at Nellis Air Force Base. Oh, by the way, this guy has an APO address in the UK. And Sean goes, yeah, he said he worked in the military in the UK. And it all matches up. It's the right birth date, right addresses, right middle name, right full names. This guy was at Nellis. Anybody can do these searches now. So trying to cover up the fact that he was in the military is not going to work, right? Trying to say he's some flake. He was in the military for like, I think it was like
22 years.
Something like that. Yeah, exactly. By the way, I found official U.S. government Air Force articles mentioning his name as a staff sergeant.
No, ChatGPT has it. Yeah. I use ChatGPT to write his bio. Like,
yeah, I'm ranting. I'm basically ranting how I would on Twitter right now live on your show. So, yeah, I just think the whole situation we have right now is ridiculous. Overclassifying UAPs is only helping who? Nobody. The Russians know. The Soviets knew. The Chinese know. A lot of the American public who's paying attention, they know there's something going on. So, yeah, it's stupid. It's just hurting. We are hurting ourselves. So pass the UAPDA. Get rid of the stupid eminent domain thing everybody argues about, right? The poison pill. Get rid of the UAPDA.
Well, I mean, look, not to go too deep in the politics, but they cremated crooks before Congress had a chance to investigate the thing.
That's not my wheelhouse. It's not my wheelhouse.
I know. I'm just saying, like, the government has lost credibility in so many. I mean, we had one candidate talking about price controls. Like,
exactly. The whole world changes once the UAPDA passes. Over time, the whole world actually changes because now we can.
If it does, but there's the poison pill of this like eminent domain nonsense.
In my opinion, this is just my thesis, my theory is that there are some smart people. There is a competency crisis. There are some smart people left in the U.S. government and in intelligence, and they know this is a risk to keep this overclassified. So, I think they are some of the people pushing to get the UAPDA. They know we have a serious problem. And if it's not fixed, it could actually fundamentally lead to some really bad events occurring if this phenomenon comes back again. And I don't see why it wouldn't come back. It keeps coming back in history over and over again. So maybe we resume nuke testing, which I think is inevitable. Sooner or later, we're going to resume testing. The Russians are, we are, whatever. Somebody's going to hit the button first. The North Koreans are already doing it. As soon as we do nuke testing, most likely the phenomenon is going to ramp back up. Maybe, listen, keeping this classified is not helping. It's not preventing panic because the American public doesn't care anyway. Listen, we've already had disclosure. We've already had a form of disclosure. Really.
I mean, come September, November, and January, they're going to have plenty of things to panic about. So, and it's got nothing to do with UAPs.
Yeah,
so,
it's not my will. I don't get into politics.
I know. I'm just.
It's not my wheelhouse. I stay out.
I'm not getting in there. I'm just saying there are 3 discrete events that are insanity. Insanity personified.
And, I'm hoping whoever's next president will help push forward the UAPDA. I'm hoping, whatever party gets power, pushes forward the UAPDA. It's a very important thing to pass. And we need to basically, and the other thing too is like, people have told me that if they knew this was real and they knew there was a job waiting for them to help investigate UAPs officially in intelligence, they wouldn't have left intelligence. They wouldn't have left.
Yeah, I told you that. Well,
you're not the only one. You're not the only one, though. Other people have told me that. They're like, holy shit, you mean that shit is real? How do I get involved in that? But now,
they could have told me about remote viewing, and I've been like, holy crap, that sounds interesting.
If you listen to Dr. Eric W. Davis, who testified, like, officially, he said that they can't recruit people. He said that the program, the crash retrieval program, had basically hardly any funding, underfunded, and they were having massive recruiting problems. If they pass the UAPDA and just tell the U.S. public and the world what happened, recruiting is not going to be a problem. There will be people going out of the woodwork like, why do I want to work on video games? Because here's the problem with video games. We have a lot of people working in software, amazing software engineers who noodle on video games. When I was at SpaceX, and I'm not allowed to talk about SpaceX at all, I would say it a different way. There's a lot of people working on video games who would probably gladly work on cool projects for these aerospace companies if they knew this was real. But they don't. It's not real. To them, they live in the reality bubble where the UAP phenomenon is fake, it's a hoax, it's not real, it's bubbles, it's geese, it's swamp gas. But the reality is the universe, the real world, the real universe is way more rich and amazing and dangerous than we realize. We're not telling people this. And so if you look at, I'm looking at the system now, the world we live in from the outside in, and there's a reality bubble around that most people, right? And they're like, in that bubble, and they're like, it's not real. There are no ETs or no NHOs or no freaking saucers. None of this is real. Well, it's kind of a depressing place. We're all alone in the universe. You know, we're nothing around for light years. We'll never be able to reach these stars. We don't have the technology. It's a depressing place, actually. And if you look at the history of UAP reports, going back to the late 1800s, it's like it nudges us forward. It excites people. So we have 1896, 1897, the phenomena, whatever the phenomena actually is, excites Edison to go, wow, we can make a freaking airplane. That's pretty cool. Provably, like it's a newspaper articles. Fast forward to 1947, in the late 40s and 50s, saucers come out. Everybody's excited about space travel. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is a really big thing. Rockets, radar, science. It's just this big thing, right? And go fast forward, late 80s, early 90s. Lazar comes out, very controversial guy. Claims he's worked at Area 51. There's saucers there. He goes to an ex-CIA guy, Lear, which is weird. Anyway, it's all through the media. Oh my God, we got saucers at Area 51. That excites people. And for years, it excites people so much that children are writing letters to President Clinton about it. And Clinton's talking about it. That's how big it was back then.
And the Pope.
Pope
John Paul II. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So, yeah.
And his answer was not, no, they're not there. He just said, we are all God's children. That was his answer.
So it seems like the Catholics, at least some parts of the Catholic hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, the church is not lying about it. They just don't talk about it. They know. I mean, they probably have like missiles and, correspondence going back 2,000 years that report,
exactly.
Sightings and things with these entities.
Field day historians could have if they were just told this is real. Actually, they're given permission to go look at it. Because I'm not an historian. Richard Dolan is a great historian, in my opinion. Probably one of the best in the world because he's actually paying attention to what actually happened in history. Unlike the ones who ignore the phenomenon, which in my opinion are idiots. Anyway, imagine SETI. Imagine that. Like if UAPs appear over Washington, D.C., and then there's, they're finding these astronomical transients. Well, wait a second. We have a lot of data that's been recorded over many decades, digital and some plate data. They could reanalyze all that data and they could find, I'm sure they will find other transients that have occurred. I could just go on and on, man. The material science, impact alone. It's like these weird isotopes.
Well, AI, when I interviewed Dr. Gary Nolan, we talked about this. Like AI is going to make a huge difference with that because you can have AI run all the permutations and combinations and see if there's novel emergent properties of different uses of these elements with the isotopic ratio. So I think he gave an example actually between lithium-5 and lithium-6. And one of them, if you give them to rats, one of them, it results in like overmothering.
I heard
in one case. Yeah. Like there are real, and if you just look at the chemistry, there's no reason to really, you wouldn't see that or you wouldn't draw that conclusion. So there's a whole area of material science that is going to receive a massive
boost. Huge.
Yeah. Evolution, like a revolution maybe. Yeah. And it's coming faster than I think we think, because I think they already have AI algorithms that explore this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited. The impact of computing technology could be mind-blowing. So the thing is, there's probably, is this a theory? There's probably tripwire technology that could trigger the phenomenon to come back in a big way.
Your laptop behind you has been switching.
I know, but that don't get me started on that laptop. By the way, Intel, that's a whole different situation. Intel CPUs have serious problems. I'm trying to get this laptop to be reliable. So I'm updating it right now. Yeah, it's my favorite laptop, but I was doing all my original research on this Intel license. Yeah,
people are thinking you have a hitchhiker or something like that.
No, it's doing its thing back there. It's fine. Yeah, I wanted to mention this too. As we go further into space to Moon and Mars, the astronauts have to be told that the phenomenon is real, because if an astronaut is on the Moon or on Mars and the phenomenon has a drone, let's say there's a drone, a sphere that goes overhead, you don't want to be telling them, oh, by the way, right? They need to know. They have a need to know, right? So like, it just goes on and on and on. Like you can't. The cover up is obsolete. Watch the original Men in Black movie, right? It's kind of like Chase Brandon. I don't remember all the details. Chase Brandon is like cousin of one of the main actors on Men in Black, right? Chase Brandon is a legendary CIA figure who wrote an interesting book.
Who, by the way, has disappeared.
He's disappeared, yeah. And John Ramirez is mentioned, I think, Chase Brandon. Well, anyway, in the Men in Black movie, it shows, metaphorically, like, new blood has to come in. So whoever's running the UAP program, the reverse engineering program, if there's a UFO working group, I'm sure there is. There has to be. Why don't the Chinese and the Russians have something going on? They're obsolete. The way they're running this is obsolete. They're screwing it up. Like so many other things. There's a probably crisis of capabilities and competence right now. I pray to God it's not impacting the UAP working group, which I'm sure exists. Certainly somewhere must be a group.
I almost guarantee it is.
I know. Here's the deal. I'm actually kind of hoping that the competency crisis has impacted them because they clearly will not be able to keep the secret anymore. They're going to continue screwing up, and they are screwing up.
Plus AI, like they're not going to be able to hide it because although, have you heard the discussion that Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz were having with like a government official, and they were talking about AI.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and I remember the kind of the details. There was something physics itself.
They basically said, like, look, you have to if you're going to classify it at the application level, not at the root mathematics level. And the official just looked at them and said, well, why not? We've classified, deep physics principles in the past. We can do the same with mathematics.
Yeah, that's not conspiracy.
Are you serious?
That's part of the Atomic Energy Act. That's the whole infrastructure. Yeah. It's like the whole parts of physics are blocked off, right? And so, and according to Colonel Nell and UAPDA, the Atomic Energy Act also covers UAP. So who knows what they captured? Now, here's the deal. We know this, and this is actually kind of funny because it's a Chinese astronomer who made this comment a few years ago. Like, we know they're not here to steal our oil, and we know the UAPs are not petroleum powered. That doesn't leave many things. How are these things powered, right? So is it fusion powered? Is it atomic? Who knows, right? But it's certainly classified, whatever it actually turns out to be.
Yeah, it could be 0-point energy, like
who knows, right?
Like the Kashmir effect is like
there's
an example of that, right?
Yeah, and so I've thought about this quite deeply. Like there actually are legit reasons for keeping this classified from an energy perspective, because right now petroleum is this amazing resource, right? But there's still limits on its consumption and its production. Okay, so we can only basically tear down so many trees and burn so much petroleum.
Right. You don't want unlimited energy, so they tear down the rainforest to build out.
Yeah,
like,
but if
logging, right?
If we had free energy or really easy nuclear fusion, the rate that we could tear down our infrastructure, our trees and our poison our biosphere could massively increase. Also, the rate that we can extract petroleum resources could massively increase. That's not good. And so I can understand why that should be kept classified.
Or you could have gravity weapons, right? Where you just open a black hole into the middle of it. Right.
Anti-gravity drones, Russia could have them. Like it's a nightmare, right? So there's nightmare situations that could evolve if they declassify too much. But there's also bad situations that have evolved if we keep it totally classified too. So I mean, all these things we're talking about right now, we've been talking about on Twitter for years. So it's kind of interesting to be able to talk about it in person. But anyway, I'm exhausted. I can answer questions or whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, why don't we take a few questions? We'll take like 3 questions. It might take a little bit to pop up, but just give people a chance to ask like 3 questions, because I think we're like an hour over at least. So I don't even know if we're still on the radio. I doubt we're on the radio anymore. I think it probably would have cut us off. But let's see. Well, this is just a comment. This is not a question. Islamic terrorists.
I mean, exactly. Do you want Iran to have anti-gravity, 0-point energy weapons? I don't think so. Personally, I don't think it's a bad idea. So, I get it. I get it why there would have to be containment of a lot of this technology. It's extremely dangerous. However, the fact that it exists should not be classified. That should be public knowledge.
Well, like they've been able to keep nuclear weapons classified,
exactly.
Right? So I don't. Now, I mean, the difference with nuclear weapons, though, is it's very difficult to get in highly enriched uranium, right? Which requires these massive cascades of like cyclotrons and stuff like that, which requires an extremely high level of investment. But with 0 point energy, it might be pretty simple.
The
You might
scary,
just
the
need
scary
like
thing
water,
is this:
right?
what if though 0 point energy is actually trivially simple to develop once you know the secret, and
Right.
then
You're just pulling stuff out of the
genie's out of the
vacuum,
bottle,
basically.
and it's open source. The genie's out of the bottle. Are we ready for that? I don't think we are culturally, genetically, maybe ready for that level of energy technology. It's kind of scary, but it's inevitable. It's gonna. So here's the deal. This is not an American thing. The Chinese have reported through a famous astronomer there. I'm sorry, I don't have the name off the top of my head, but I've tweeted it recently, the last week or so. Yeah, they've been watching UAPs over their key observatories for decades. They know this thing's real, right? China's very hard to research because of the language barrier and secrecy. But they have released officially through their media, state media, that we know all about this. By the way, they've also talked about they have AI monitoring UAPs flying on radar. They've talked about that in the last few years too. So that's from state media. It's approved. The Chinese Communist Party is approving that stuff. So the Chinese public knows.
Here's the first question. So, what is your hope to see? What do you hope to see happen in the next 6 months?
UAPDA version 2. I hope that part of the I forget what is it part of. It's part of a bigger act. I hope that it gets approved. Right?
Yeah, it would be the National Defense Authorization.
That's right, the NDAA.
Right.
Yeah, and I hope that the stupid U.S. politics, because it's all stupid, I hope it doesn't interfere with it. And you know it will. You know that poison pill, the freaking. We already know that eminent domain thing. Everybody hates it, right? The aerospace companies hate it, and individuals hate it too. Like
I think that's there for a reason, right? And
yeah, I don't know what reason it's in there for, but we tried it. We already tried it once and it didn't work. So
all right. So the 1933 Magenta case. Do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, I haven't researched super deeply. It is in the chronology I have. I've seen it basically all the stuff the people on Twitter would have seen. I know that there's Italian telegrams and stuff like that. I got to say this though, Lieutenant Colonel. There are some figures that were in World War II in Italy. When the retrieval, Grush said the retrieval happened. There was
that's how he learned to, be an intelligence officer when it went like right in Italy during like following World War II. The British, I think, helped trained him basically, but he also learned from operating against the Russians in Italy during that time period. So afterwards,
so Lieutenant Colonel Corso was there. He's well known. Day after Roswell, he talked all about the situation that happened in the early 90s. Also, Angleton, a key architect, intelligence figure. For
James Jesus Angleton.
Yeah. He was also in Italy there at a very high level. So the odds that they wouldn't have known, I think, are low. I think Angleton, for sure, I would suspect would know. Would have been involved or at least known about it. So I'm not an expert on 33 though.
Okay, so based on your research, do you think that the UAP pilots could be humans from a breakaway civilization?
Yep.
Not necessarily NHI or both or neither?
Yeah, I do. I think you cannot. I think it is impossible to look. If you're honest and intelligent, you look at this chronology. The data, it's all public information, and you read some of Dolan's books and Timothy Good's books, etc. Listen to Grush, Mellon. It is impossible to say that nothing's happening. Something is happening. And it's very complicated, too. There's a wide variety of sighting reports, all the way in encounters, and a lot of different occupant descriptions going on a spectrum from, like weird gray-looking things with big eyes to strange human-looking entities with white or bluish skin to just human-looking people.
Or to blobs.
Or weird things, like in France especially. By the way, in France, there was a lot of weird things that we're seeing, too. So the phenomena seems... I'm just talking about it in a purely phenomena sense. The phenomena shows us many different types of entities or occupants or whatever. It shows us hundreds of different sighting things in the sky as well. It's not just the same disk. Like even in 47, we've got a wide range of reports from spheres or orbs, some metallic, some glowing, to crescent-shaped vehicles that make noise that she might have even been jet powered. We're not really sure. To flying saucers, some small and some large, that were metallic and flew silently. And that's just 47, and we're not even talking about like the history beyond that, right? It's off the charts. So anyway, to further answer that question too, I think that personally, like looking at this, and by the way, Jacques Vallée in some of his earlier books talk about this too. The phenomena it seems to be already here, right? It's not like it's coming from outer space all the time, because if you look at it mathematically, Jacques Vallée wrote about this, the number of sightings was so enormous that it could not have been physically, it would have been impractical for all of them to be physical objects flying from somewhere else. The scale of that operation would be insane. So whatever is happening, it seems to be my opinion, it seems to be some sort of physical phenomena that at a very high level, some sort of intelligent physical phenomena that we haven't figured out, plasma of some sort. Borrowing plasmoid, I can borrow the Soviet terminology. It appears to be something maybe under the ocean, underground, and or on the moon that has easy reach to us. So, and it also appears to be real-time phenomenon that's already here right now. So these spheres have been monitored and seen since at least World War II. And there's videos on Twitter right now, tons of them, of spheres over, I think, Palmdale and all this stuff. Maybe they're fake. Maybe they're ours. Who the hell knows? Maybe they're just drones. But some percentage of these videos might be real. And I actually think some percentage are. The problem is there's also rumors that counterintelligence is still active today. This is what pisses me off about the cover-up, UFO cover-up, is that according to major figures, there are funded programs to spread disinformation to American citizens about the phenomenon. They spread fake videos and fake photos.
Hello, Eglin Air Force Base on Reddit.
And that's illegal. That should be illegal. What if it is?
And by the way, they use bots to drive fake consensus.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I can understand. I get it. The CIA screwing around with the Soviet Union or Russia or China. Okay, yes, it's their thing. Do it. Go have fun. That's what they're going to do, right? It's their job. But to sit there and spread disinformation to American citizens and fake videos and interfere with social media is unforgivable, in my opinion. That's wrong. Yeah. And the people that are doing that, I hope one day it is made illegal. And I hope.
Well, look,
there's karma over this.
I'm sure there was some lawyer in the DOD who found some loophole.
President Truman, or one of Truman's people, or Eisenhower, probably dates back that far, and it's probably legal under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, or executive orders that are secret and classified. So, and it's wrong. What they're doing is wrong.
What do you think the phenomenon is?
My personal opinion is it's extraordinary psychic, whatever that is. It can influence people remotely. It can give them weird dreams. It can send messages. It's intelligent, highly intelligent, way more intelligent than we are. We underestimate it massively. The phenomenon can appear in many different forms. It can appear as plasma-like. It can appear as physical objects. The Soviets thought that the plasmoid UAPs could actually go physical for short periods of time. It can crash. Dr. Eric W. Davis has talked about that. The objects crash. We can get the materials. They're super high technology. I don't believe in the paranormal. I think it's all technology fundamentally. So that doesn't mean I don't believe that things like ghosts or UAP happen. I just think there is a physics, a very high level physics that can account for all of these things that are happening.
I don't think they're tech, but I think there's just a part of physics that we either do understand. We just haven't been able to describe this phenomena in a quantum mechanical basis.
Yeah.
Or there's just there's aspects of physics that we just don't fully understand yet.
So
either that or we live in a simulation, which is easily explains everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But even if we live in a physical simulation, even if we live in a sim, there are rules that are probably, there should be rules, right? We can reverse engineer.
Yeah, but you can, you just get me the code. Just get me the right? In video games, you're a video games guy, right? Like up, down, left, right, A, B. Remember Contra?
Yeah, exactly. I played Contra. It was a great game as a kid. Anyway, for a few hours when Contra first came out, my friend and I locally we're playing it. We're addicted to it. And I played it in the morning. I was supposed to go to school, and I'm like, screw this. I'm missing the first 2 classes. I'm playing Contra. That's how addictive that game was. But anyway, to answer Darren Plain's question here, there is evidence, there are rumors, and there's indications and evidence that the Soviets.
He's asking about the core secret. What's the core secret?
Well, the Soviets in the United States did. This is official, collaborate in late 60s about the phenomenon to some extent. Dr. Felix Eagle and others work with our experts, right? I don't know what level. There's rumors that there was a deconfliction protocol. If, everybody would know about the red phone, like, oh, we're doing a nuke test, things like that. We're setting up a rocket. We had that kind of deconfliction to make sure the Soviets, wouldn't think they would be attacked and vice versa. But there's also rumors that that they had an agreement or even a treaty where if a UAP appeared over their installations or a UAP appeared over ours, we wouldn't think it's an attack from the other power. There had to have been a level of communication at some point starting in probably in the mid-60s or later, where each superpower could get on the phone and say, hey, are you flying over this base? Because we're seeing UAPs, so we're seeing something on radar right now. There had to be deconfliction. There had to be. Otherwise, we're risking nuclear war, right? Could you imagine a UAP flying over Hanford or the DOD or the White House, right? It's a terrifying situation.
This is a good one. So in the historical documents, are the groups of supposed ETs consistent? You showed a document from NATO saying 12 species.
I'm not aware of whatever document you're referring to there about the 12 species. However, I think there was a former NATO guy, well-known guy. He was a UFO lecturer. I'm trying to remember his name. I'm tired here. But he had documents. He claimed he saw documents where there were 12 species and stuff like that. Here's what I'm going to say. In Frank Scully's archive, there's some weird letters in there that occurred that were sent before Washington, D.C. was overflown. Frank Scully had a heads up that D.C. was going to get overflown. I don't know how the hell he knew this information, but he had a heads up. So here's what I'm going to say. Looking at the newspaper archives for 47, in my opinion, there were collaborators. So I believe Dr. Brandenburg's right. We were overflown by UAPs. It's clear in the data. There's a massive spike of reports, military reports, jets were scrambled. However, lots of hoaxes. Some of those hoaxes, I think, were just kids. That shows in the FBI data that come. The FBI declassified files come out. However, there's also metallic machined objects that were dropped from the air and landed with a large crash, sometimes with a bright flash and an explosion or smoke. There's a lot of these reports in there. And I get the impression after examining thousands of these reports that there were collaborators. And what I mean by collaborators, and maybe they weren't like actively communicating with the phenomenon, but they helped cover up the fact that there was actual real objects in the sky. I think it's quite complex. There's these weird indications that there's this other level of interaction between the public and the phenomena that bypasses the military. It keeps coming through.
I might have. Well,
yeah.
What do you know about it? I know a hair's breadth because I wrote a short story about one. But what these underground drilling machines are called is subterranes. The Soviets had a design in like 1972 that was nuclear powered, and it would basically heat up the ground in front of it and just melt it kind of around, and then use that to kind of surge forward. It was more detailed than that, but you can look it up and read all about it. And it made, and I think the U.S. looked at similar designs, but the kind of I don't know, what history or the information kind of just dies there. I wouldn't be surprised if they do exist and they're all around, but that's all I know about them. So
I would fully expect us to have deep underground bases that are totally classified. And there's rumors that the Soviets did too, right? So I think it's what the Cold War.
All right, what would you call the modern day Majestic 12? I think they've also gone by Zodiac.
Zodiac, you've heard that. I think calling them the UAP working group makes a lot of sense because Corso said the UFO working group. And it would make sense. They would have domain experts, surely, that would, from all different industries and science fields and stuff like that, specialties, that would be available on call. They have to be on call 24/7 for when this phenomenon, not if, when it pops up. Like, for example, when Langley's overflown, who do you call? Certainly somewhere there's got to be a chain of command where the call is made, and then, So I would call them the UAP working group. I have no idea. I don't know anything more than anybody on Twitter.
Yeah, you didn't say it, but something's out there picked it up.
Yeah, so the deal is
BSRA.
the BSRA folks picked up warnings, or how I say, they picked up indications that something was coming. If you look at Ray Palmer, by the way, I've tweeted this too. Ray Palmer had intuition or picked up rumors or warnings that the atomic bomb attacks were going to happen before they happened in 45. So humanity seems to have this prescient ability to like figure out. It's like there's something coming, right? And we're hearing rumors like John Ramirez talks about this and stuff, ex-CIA guy, that something's coming in roughly 3 years. I think other figures as well are saying. I think Sand's saying this too. Something's coming. I have picked up my own, rumors from people because I talk a lot of people behind the scenes.
People won't get this reference until they watch the second Jason Sands interview.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
When we talk about 2026, TikTok,
we are on a razor's edge. We know the phenomenon is very active. There are many rumors. If you look at the chronology, and I don't pay attention to what's happening in recent era purposely because I don't want to piss off.
Dangerous. It's dangerous.
It is dangerous. Right. Exactly. I don't want to get too close. So I purposely do not look at what's happening. What I will do is if somebody in the news media, there's a guy who runs a website. It's called disclosurediaries.com. And he might be a media guy. I'm not really sure. He compiles reports. They're just media reports. I'm like, screw it. I scrape it and put it in my database because I just want to keep high-level attention to what's going on, right? So anyway, if you look at what happened, I think it was early last year. It was like the Chinese balloon incident and all these other crashes apparently happened. There's all these scrambles that happen. Dude, the chronology goes crazy early last year. So
they still haven't explained what landed or what. Well, I think they explained the Chinese balloon because there's 3 shoot downs. They explained the Chinese balloon that was shot down over the U.S. East Coast. The Canadians explained the American shoot down of some UAP over Canadian territory, but they've never explained the shoot down over Dead Horse, Alaska, and Prudhoe Bay.
Yeah,
didn't explain that one. It just kind of
the rumors are all over Twitter. It's a craft. They got at least one craft. That's the rumor.
Well, I commissioned a bunch of remote viewers to look at the latest U.S. crash retrieval, and they were all reporting a wintry environment and this and that. I mean, they had no idea. They had, 8 digits. That's all they got. They had no idea, but they are all getting like this crash, and they also were getting like a blob-like ET in some way. So I don't know. It could be complete garbage. Yeah. But I find it curious that they were all describing wintry locations and et cetera. So
yeah, it still continues. Here's the deal. In the 90s, I read a little bit about UFOs, and I'm like, it's cool. I read Dolan, the classics, some of them. Forgot all about it because my father had a sighting in the late 60s, right before he went to Vietnam. He had a sighting as a kid. He told us as children, his sons, that he had a sighting, but he just kept it secret. He just told his close family and stuff. It was a saucer-shaped object that had lights on it. It lasted a few minutes. It was over Deptford, New Jersey, over school. And I don't know if anybody else saw it, but it was really significant to him, right? And he told us this in the 80s, and I'm like, wow, that's really neat. And then I saw UFO Coverup Live, 1988. Everybody felt that was embarrassing. Like, people were embarrassed that they appeared on that. I thought as a kid, I was mesmerized. I was like, what the hell is this shit? What the hell? There's UFOs, there's saucers, there's Soviets involved. The Soviet ufologists appeared on my satellite. In 1988, I saw it all live on Keller TV, man. Rabbit ears. It was like, this is crazy shit. And so in my high school had UFO books. It had Men in Black books, man. It was old school. And I opened these books. There's these big books with big photos of these weird Men in Black. I'm like, what the hell is this shit? That's exciting. That's like really neat. But I forgot about it because, it's not real. It's just fantasy, right? It's all bullshit. It's all swamp gas. And then as I said earlier, New came out. So it's awfully weird that a lot of intelligence, military people, government people across the world, not just the United States, are saying this is all real. So I don't think they're all mentioning this. I think there's something going on. I have I'm thinking about that myself. Well, first, I think my personal opinion is Lou Elizondo tossed the tables. Like there's every indication that he quit, and here's why I think he really did quit and he tossed the tables. because a man was attacked. The DOD ain't going to attack a lackey, okay? They're not attacking the former Arrow guy, all right? They're attacking Lou Elizondo. That's a classic indication that Lou did something.
He's onto something. He's over target.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, they attacked the guy. We're instantly, as we, meaning people on UFO Twitter and researchers, are like, wait a second, what's the DOD up to? Why are they attacking this guy? Huh? Oh, what's going on? And so it's super obvious with modern information tech, modern media, Twitter. It's like we know exactly what's going on here. This is Blue Book 2.0. They're attacking this guy. And so what does Lou say? And he seems like a good guy. And here's the deal.
This generation of counterintelligence people, look, I'm not an expert.
They're embarrassing.
But if you want a story to die, you just ignore it.
You ignore it.
The worst thing you can do is draw attention.
We're helping them, Sean. We're helping these guys.
Yeah,
they clearly have a competency crisis. Whoever's training these modern day.
And the second stupid thing is you threaten them. Like, look, they just make my podcast more marketable because I have this scary statement at the beginning. I had to redact certain words because of fear of retaliation, harassment, and administrative terrorism from Arrow. Those are all true statements.
But we know SANS worked for you guys, right? It's not secret. Anybody can find this in 2 minutes on Google. So we know we work for you guys, and we know you're threatening the security clearance. So wait a second. There's really only 2 reasons why I could think they probably threatened this clearance, and one of them is these things are real and he's telling the truth. So it's awfully strange. But anyway, we're helping the modern day counterintelligence guys. They need some help though. I don't think they're going to listen to us. So
I can actually answer John's question, by the way. I don't know if it's true, but based on intercepted communications, because that's what Jason Sands did. That was his job. He was there at the Nellis test range to intercept telecommunications from scientists and engineers working on site on the program. And he was there to just identify vulnerabilities so that they could close leaks. But in the course of doing that, one of the things that he had overheard, so again, it could be disinformation, I don't know, but I asked him very directly, what's this 2026, 2027 thing all about? And he said 3 things. He said the NHIs, whoever they are, or whatever civilization we may be interacting with, made 3 promises. The first promise was that they're coming back and they're going to take their tech back. Anything that we retrieved, et cetera, they're coming for it. And they expect us to relinquish it. The second promise was if we have any prisoners or bodies of NHI that had crashed here at some point or were taken prisoner in some way, they want those back. And then the third, pending the first 2, there was a possible exchange of some form of emissaries. Okay. So of course I instantly got giddy because what that told me is if people in the program didn't come out as of last year when they had a chance, if they come out now, well, the thing I didn't say is if those things don't happen, anyone and everyone associated with that program would be exterminated. Okay. So anybody that comes out now, right? My personal view, no mercy, too late. The only reason you're coming out is because you're scared, right? From a game theoretic perspective, the dominant strategy for people on the other side of disclosure who've been left in the dark and fed shit, right? Like mushrooms for all these years, no mercy for these people, right? The only reason they're coming out is to save their hide. So they're done as far as I'm concerned, right? They should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And, well, you can figure out what's next because the alternative was they get executed by somebody. Anyway, I don't know if that's true, but if that's true, these people are done. They're done. No mercy.
I take it.
So all I say is I look, and if that's true, tick tock.
Yeah, I take a different approach. My opinion is this. My opinion is most people involved in this program are just doing their duty. They're told to keep it secret. They'll keep it because the Russians could find them. They keep it secret, right? I mean, they're doing. Maybe they know in the back of their head, hey, this sucks, right? Most of them doing their duty, right? And I think it's this program that's just going on for so long on cruise control, right? It's just a train wreck at this point. The crash retrieval program has failed. They couldn't reverse engineer the tech. I believe Dr. Davis is telling the truth about
But here's the thing: there was a process where they could go and disclose the program without any legal jeopardy whatsoever. Like the process was right there for them, and I think there's 40 people who did come forward, so good on them.
Yeah.
But anybody like now, it's too late. Like if if you're trying to save your hide, no mercy. Sorry, TikTok.
Yeah, it's not my wheelhouse. I'm more of a researcher. I try purposely to stay out of the latest stuff. Although I gotta be honest, like the former Arrow director, it's such a hilarious situation. The memes are so funny. I've done my best.
He's perfect. He's straight out of Central Casting from Dr. Evil University.
Casting. I can't resist.
He's got the goatee. He's got like the mad scientist vibe.
And here's the deal. The people, his handler in DOD, they don't understand the actual situation like we do. Because we're kind of like the man on the street, kind of we're looking around, we're what the hell's going on here? Most of the public does not pay any attention at all. They could give a shit. They don't care. So it's just us and them. And we know it. Both of us know what's up. They've got clearances. They know what's up. We don't have clearances, but we know what's up because we're researchers. We talk about it on Twitter all the time. We know Blue Book 2.0 is what you're doing. So it's stupidity. It's just making it worse. I love it. It's perfect fuss. So from our goal at UFO Twitter, I want as much fuss as possible. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep throwing that guy out there. We love that man. Please don't change to somebody else who's more competent. Please.
Yeah, and don't threaten the guy. Like, don't threaten him.
He's
a gift.
He's a gift. And he really is. And I really do feel he's just doing his duty.
Yeah, he is doing his job.
He probably thinks
he's just doing his job.
He probably thinks this is for the United States, for the good of the country.
And it might be. Look, there's also scientists and engineers working on this program. And they might want to come out into the public, but the moment they do, they expose themselves to Russian and Chinese intelligence.
Yeah,
and part of what he's doing is protecting them, whether they know that or not. So, not everything's black and white.
In the meantime, the horse memes with the horse vomiting, they'll continue. And you know what? Here's the deal: it's like guerrilla combat, guerrilla warfare, and we have entrenched opposition, but we have memes on our side, right? And we're given gifts on a silver platter, like that guy. So we're just going to keep using it, right? And we'll get more people going, what's all that fuss about? Why are you guys fighting? What is this UAPDA? What is this guy, Grush, testifying under oath about crash saucers? Think about the world has already changed. We've had crash saucers testified in Congress. I never in a million years, Sean, would imagine we would get to this point.
And have 90% of the population has no clue.
They have no idea. They're debating about who's eating ice cream in the White House. Like, this is crazy. We are in crazy times, man. And yeah, I talked to my friends in the tech industry and stuff, and they're like, wow, there is a lot of fuss here. They're like, but they're busy making money, they got bills, they got mortgages, car payments, whatever. They're just like, yeah, okay. It's like, this is the biggest news of all time. You realize that, right? Okay. Well, to me, I want to be ahead of the curve. That's my whole job, is to be ahead of the curve technologically. With my own software situation, I'm always looking at what the industry's doing. It's trying to be ahead.
The stifling of human advancement that was
mind blowing
over the last 80 years.
Why don't we have moon bases already? Why don't we have fusion rockets and all these cool? Why aren't we already on Mars? Why are we struggling on the International Space Station right now? Why are men and women stranded right now on the ISS? That's the situation right now. Hardly anybody knows about it. So,
yeah, I just saw something flash that there was a contract that SpaceX won to basically bring it down on a decelerating orbit or something.
I'm not talking about SpaceX. I can't. I have Australia listening right now. I don't know.
Yeah, that was great on that space.
Yeah.
What exactly? What dates and what exact programs did you work on? It's just like it was just like
I don't talk
on its face an obvious counterintelligence person trying to get you to.
I'm sure Pine.
All right. So I'm just going to read. This is coming from Arlen Andrews Sr. He's a science fiction writer, but he's also an engineer. But he writes from LinkedIn, NASA has contracted $843 million for for SpaceX to deorbit the ISS,
Oh, yeah.
burning it up in the Earth's atmosphere. But what if SpaceX instead directed the emptied ISS to crash in an unimportant area of the moon, delivering its 1,000,000 pounds of Earth origin metals and other materials where they would constitute a smashed junk pile that could be mined by future people living on
It's
the
an
moon?
interesting idea, actually. Yeah, I can't talk about anything related to that.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking you. I'm just
Yeah.
sharing that with the audience. I don't want to
Yeah.
put you in any jeopardy.
Yeah,
But
I don't know anything, man. Yeah, so yeah, I just
right.
yeah. So I wanted to mention, by the way, I wanted to mention something I didn't have time to get into the slides. Is that there are many developments behind the scenes that people just don't see. There are many researchers who will work on UFOs or saucers or whatever you think, but they won't tell the public because they're afraid or they can't or whatever. And none of these people work for the U.S. government. No security clearance involved. But there are AI researchers right now worldwide that are getting all the data they can to train AI. And so I've been helping them with that, and others have been helping as well. And so I've been gathering every piece of data that I can get. And I have gotten personally, I've downloaded 1.1 million pieces of data. Most of that data actually came from AFU, the Archives for the Unexplained. And it took 2 weeks to download all these files. I actually had downloaded 4 times, something like that. And then I made sure I diffed the 2 downloads to make sure I got all the files and everything. That data has been provided to the AI training people, and they're working on that right now. But what I realized is, wait a second, I have all these files, like PDF files, rich text files, doc files, etc., HTML files, going back many decades. Let's make it searchable. And so that's like the number one thing. It's just make it locally searchable. So I've got a tool here. It's called DocFetcher. It's open source. I unleashed DocFetcher. It took 40 hours of CPU time. It crashed several times. I had to restart it. It was a pain in the ass. But now I can search locally for anything I want. And it's like incredible. And I would love to give this to the public. I just don't know how to give this resource to the public. So that's something new that's happening.
I'm going to post a question. Do not answer it because you are not able to answer it. You can't touch that one. You can't touch that one. Just because Elon Musk is associated with SpaceX. That's all.
I can't touch it.
It doesn't mean you know anything. It's just you can't touch it.
I just can't touch it. I will stay away from anything to do with SpaceX.
He just wants to hear the answer. I knew the answer when he asked the question.
Yeah, I just can't go there. Yeah, right, so there's that search engine thing I wanted to just tell the public about. And by the way, it's all public data. Here's the thing: it's a public repository. The AFU stuff. None of my files are secret because I mostly just from my chronology has 10,000 or 11,000 links, so I downloaded all that, made it locally searchable. Love to make that public because it will be an unbelievable resource. Imagine you can type in a search phrase and see everything anybody's talked about UFOs for many decades. A lot of these web pages and websites are gone, even from archive.org, but people have been backing them up at AFU. And so most people, I believe it's the biggest collection of files related to the phenomena outside the Vatican. It might be bigger than the Vatican's files.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to let this stuff come out in the next 2 years if the entire system.
Well, imagine if they don't declassify this, we can predict what's probably going to happen. The Crash Into program is not going to get funding, or it's going to get shitty funding. The intelligence agency responsible for UAPs does not get increased funding or less funding. The UAPs could fly. They already are flying over right now, over Langley Air Force Base and other areas, and they can just keep flying. And you know what? Maybe there are NHIs out there that actually want disclosure, and they can always, at any time, decide
show up
New York City, Washington D.C., Seattle, whatever, right? Who knows?
They don't. That's the question. Is
they do. It happens in spikes. So the thing here's what I want to emphasize to people that are listening is that you got to have a different sense of time with UAPs for research and the phenomena. To us, 5 years is a long time. To the phenomena, it's nothing. It's nothing at all. 50 years is not a long time. 75 years not. Now, 120 years, yeah, we're starting to talk. Maybe that's like last month.
Do you personally know of anyone who goes by different names when giving out information on ufology?
That's an interesting question. Like a pseudonym or something, I guess.
Yeah.
I know people that are, I believe, I'll be careful what I say. I know people that are very connected, that research this topic very deeply, but are very private. They'll never talk about it in public, ever.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never hear about them, ever. This is a very serious situation. The millionaires do not take it seriously. They're out of the loop, but the billionaires, no, and they want to know more, and they want to stay.
Look, I know people who I've known for 25 years who, after I created this podcast, came to me and said, I've been in a room in a facility and I saw one, and I saw an NHI, didn't say live or dead, but like personally witnessed. But I can't say the country, and obviously I can't talk about the person. If the country found out, like, they would murder me, they would murder me. So, and that's all I'm gonna ever say.
Yeah, there are also,
and I can't prove it. It could also, that person could also be, that part of that country's intelligence, and it could be misinformation or disinformation. So I can't.
It's very Fortean. It's not. You can't say 0% probability. Probably you can't say 100%. It's somewhere fuzzy, right? And out of 100 whistleblowers, maybe only 5. All it takes is one, though.
And it's not a country you would like immediately think about, right? You'd have to do some thinking. But
yeah. So what else did I want to tell you? Oh yeah. Okay. Here's what I wanted to mention. So let's just say that UAPs are real, and there is a form of propulsion that does not require Newton's law, like as we know it anyway. It doesn't require emitting mass, things like that. It doesn't require propellers or emitting mass like rockets and stuff like that. Well, you know who would be really interested in that technology? Be the chip fabs. They would be super interested in that, actually. They would be scouring the whole world trying to find more information about this. And so I've been always just gathering intelligence and talking to people. There is an enormous amount of interest in this technology. And it goes back. Here's the thing, too. There's been a lot of weird things that have crashed on planet Earth over the last 100 years. And a lot of those reports wound up in newspaper archives. So, people can go out with various detection devices and just try to find it. And that, as far as I can determine, that's happening. So people and weird, shadowy intelligence agencies shit are just out there looking for stuff because it doesn't officially exist. So it's not illegal. None of this, that's not illegal at all.
Right, just like remote viewing, right? It doesn't exist because the CIA said it doesn't work.
We're now in this weird period of history where the phenomenon is overclassified. So you can have a Russian right now. You can have a Russian agent or one of their minions come over here, paid minions, go through a list of all the rumored crashes and all the locations in newspaper archives. By the way, we're getting like 50,000 new reports. Sorry, 50,000 new scan pages or something like that every freaking month. They can come over here and just go through the list and start looking for materials. They're going to find orbs. They might find crash disks. Who the hell knows what they're going to find out there? We don't. Do we have people? Do we have counterintelligence working on that? I highly doubt it.
Well, no, yes. Maybe, right? Like if they saw somebody on a list who is affiliated with Russian intelligence, someone in the intelligence community would vet it.
The people doing this research, and by the way, this is not a theoretical scenario. I am positive this is actually happening. I'm positive that there are foreign forces that are looking for materials.
Yeah, there's just a lot of them are just remote viewing as like an initial stage.
That's just the initial stage. Yeah, they're looking deeply and intensely right now. They know it's real. So yeah, in terms of this thing here, I actually have encountered some, I would call them threats, but it wasn't from anything UFO related. Actually, it was the paranormal, the occult community. It was very unhappy. Some were very unhappy that I was digging in archives without asking permission. I guess I gained access to some the BSRA archives, which were internal, which were private. That's made Lane's stuff, and there were some figures that were unhappy about that. Really unhappy. So yeah.
I think that's how Rich and I learned all about egregores and thought forms.
Yeah, and so after
I'll leave it at that.
After the Contact and Desert Conference, I'm like, I'm out of here. It was interesting. Very interesting situation because I remember
you did have your flight changed like 4 times, right?
Yeah, that was interesting too. There were a lot of strange coincidences that happened after I gave that presentation. I had weird people dressed in black come up after the presentation who who talk like intelligence people, actually very intelligent people, taking notes digitally on strange devices.
Always from other countries, right? Because that's what Five Eyes does. They get people.
Canada.
CIA can't do that to you, but
and it was conversation with
everything. British intelligence can.
The presentation I gave did have radar references, right? But I'm not a radar guy. I'm not a passive radar guy.
Yeah, passive radar is like the
top secret.
It's like the second most secret, aside from like nuclear shielding or something like that. So,
but the guy the guy I presented with, he is a passive radar expert, actually. Mitch Randall, great guy. He gave me the slot, actually, the 45 minutes to talk about. And then after the talk, I had I'm pretty sure, 99% sure, actually, I had at least 2 foreign and domestic intelligence agencies reach out, ask me questions. And I'm like, hey, it's just an open source, a newspaper article. It's like, I'm a guy going through newspaper articles. I had nothing to do with the passive radar guy. I have nothing to do with that at all. But that triggered things. And I think probably for good reasons. But here's the deal. There was an interesting question. The guy from Canada, right? I guess Canadian intelligence, whatever he was. I don't know. He was dressed in black, by the way, in the desert. That's very strange. He asked some great questions, but he also said, hey, I think China would have passive radar already set up over here in the United States. Do you agree on that? And I'm like, sure. I think China would. I would bet anything that China already has a passive radar net cast all over the place over the United States, and we have no idea where it's at because we can't detect it. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are sources and methods that do that. Maybe like looking at certain energy signatures and
no.
We shouldn't be talking. Actually, we shouldn't be talking about this.
I mean, I'm not. But I
don't know anything about it. But
I have never.
But I can speculate enough that I sound like I know him.
I'm not a hardware expert. I'm not a radio expert at all. So, but I know. I'm sure it could be happening. We're just speculating, though. Who knows, right? We're just pulling.
Right, here's one. If you listen to Rogan, do you think the whole humanity is a technological butterfly narrative is going against disclosure? So Trussell and Weinstein podcast was concerning transhumanism is anti-space. Yeah, so I think the theory is basically that we're just here to birth AI, and then AI will, AI is the point. We're not the point.
I look at it. I look at it differently. I look at it like, if you ever heard, were they called von Neumann probes? Is Mike getting that right?
Von Neumann probes.
Von Neumann probes. Yes. So I look at humanity as a von Neumann probe, or I look at biology that way. And we're just technology. You drop us off anywhere on a suitable planet, we will reverse engineer laws of physics. We'll make rockets. We'll make technology. We'll go back into space. And we'll spread life. So the problem with AI, it does. I follow Dune, the original author Frank Herbert and his son's books, Brian Herbert, and I'm against intelligent AI and things like that. I think there's limits. I think there has to be limits, or it's going to be used against us.
Andy, thank you very much for becoming a member. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You just know what's going to happen. We're going to be censored by AI. We're going to be.
You'll appreciate this. Rich was worried I was a spy contact in the desert. Grilled me pretty hard in front of the whole crowd. You were worried I was one too, man. You were worried I was one too.
I was trained to be a paranoid person. I have an excuse. So I was trained to be very, very paranoid. And you have to be. There are Chinese and Russian and other intelligence agencies that are active. They're all over the place. There's honeypots. I'm dead serious. It's just standard in certain areas of technology, right? This is not secret. Got to be very careful.
Let's see. I don't even know.
Yeah, I have heard of them. Yeah, I don't know anything special though. I have heard of what I could look it up in 2 seconds. Yeah, I could sit here and type in Raphael right now and put it.
All right, let's see. I mean, this is.
Let's look it up. I'm kind of curious, Raphael.
All right, I probably need that last question for real. Why do you think they are here? I think that's many reasons.
That's a loaded question. So that's interesting. Here's the deal. This is just my opinion after looking at this data that we have, the chronology data from all these researchers. It appears to be there was an intervention. We were stupidly detonating large amounts of H-bombs in the atmosphere. There was so much radioactive pollution that it was appearing in our milk. It was appearing in antlers and deer and stuff.
Yeah, strontium 90 is what.
Yeah, we were poisoning ourselves, and I think it's not a secret that if we would have kept going, we would have killed ourselves. We would have radiated the planet and turned into a cinder. So we were doing. I think the scientists involved on crossroads of 40s, 50s, 60s, they didn't know what they're talking about, and they never should have had the level of H-bomb testing, A-bomb testing in the atmosphere that we did. We're insane. We're an insane species, basically. We should have did it underground, you know. So there was an intervention, and a lot of people don't like to talk about that. I know, like, if you listen to Brandenburg, I'm a big fan of Brandenburg, Dr. Brandenburg, plasma physicist. He talks about the intimidation, and there clearly was an intimidation. There's no doubt whatsoever. You don't fly over Washington, D.C. without permission and violate our airspaces repeatedly and shut down our plutonium production without being that intimidating, right? I mean, today, the intimidation continues over Langley, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, what people don't like to talk about, there does appear to be a whole bunch of different forces that were coming down here and interfacing with humanity on many different countries, including South America, whatever, and giving us these messages. The messages are very clear. It occurs over and over again in the chronology. Hey, you guys are screwing up with your nuclear technology or abusing it. Yeah, I stay out. Listen, me personally, I stay away from abductions. I stay away from all that
the
stuff.
dark stuff.
It's too dark. It's too dark for me. It's hard enough to sit there and look at landings. And, you feel crazy. You're like, what the hell? Things like that. So I stay away from that stuff.
Yeah. All right. Any final words for the audience? I got to let you get some sleep. So it's probably
thanks for listening.
1 a.m. your time, I think, right?
Yeah, easily. Holy shit, we're talking forever. Yeah, thanks for listening. I think more's coming in. We're getting AI into this data set. That's the next big thing. It might take years to actually pull off. We do have experts working on this right now. It's coming.
Yeah, I think it'll come faster than that. I think
hope so.
Much faster. So, all right. Thank you, brother. Thanks everyone for watching. It's been an amazing night.
See you later. See you later, Pine Gap. I want to say goodbye to Pine Gap too. Bye, guys.
Bye, Pine Gap.
Till next time.
Tick tock, tick tock.